Chapter 1006. Yi Bushuan also saw the behavior of the fifth Lord Hua's great-grandson. He shook his head and said, "The fifth Lord Hua's vision is amazing, but it's a pity that none of his descendants live up to expectations. They are all mediocre, and it's not uncommon for them to have a bad reputation like this. But he still has 5 adopted sons, which is enough to protect the entire Supreme Island." Seeing the appearance of Hua Xingzuan's great-grandson, Chu Xiu was even more curious about the fifth Lord Hua. The other party's vision is simply amazing. He has 5 adopted sons in a row, and each of them is outstanding. But his method of educating his descendants is a bit too mediocre. Looking at his behavior, he is even inferior to those of the 9 great families in the Central Plains. At this moment, there was a sudden quarrel outside, and there was even a faint sound of exploding aura. Chu Xiu and Yi Bushuan went out to take a look. It turned out to be 2 real pellet state martial artists fighting fiercely on the street. A group of people around were watching as if they were used to this kind of situation. It should be said that this kind of situation was very common on Haotian Island. This was not the territory of one family, and any disputes could be resolved directly on the island. Of course, both sides had to control the strength of their attacks. Otherwise, if they hurt the innocent, someone would intervene. The 2 real pellet state martial artists who were fighting were one old and one young. The young man looked like he was in his early 30s, and his actual age should be less than 50 years old. His talent was very good. However, he had obviously just stepped into the real pellet state not long ago, and he was inferior to the old man opposite him. He was already at a disadvantage. The young martial artist said hatefully, "Lin Sung Yip. In the past, you were chased by your enemies like a stray dog. It was my father who saved you and let you join the Long Gorge Island. Now that my father is dead, you can't wait to take my Long Gorge Island. Do you have any shame? You're simply unscrupulous." Lin Sung Yip sneered, "Xiao Ziki, don't talk like you are so wronged. After so many years, who is the reason why the Long Gorge Island can grow to such a scale? It's me. You, Mr. Xiao, used the forces I fought for and the resources and elixirs I earned to cultivate behind closed doors. Without me, can you have the strength you have now? Your father saved my life. When he was alive, I regarded him as my master. But now that he is gone, what right do you have to be the island master?" The enmity between these 2 people was very simple. Chu Xiu had already figured it out long ago. It was nothing more than their own family's infighting. This Lin Zongye plotted to seize the foundation left behind by Xiao Ziki's father. He believed that his contribution was greater than Xiao Ziki's, and that the position of island master should belong to him. On the other hand, Ziki thought that he was a traitor to Xiao. Xiao was a traitor to. Actually, both of them were not wrong. Every man for himself, and heaven and earth would destroy him. Who was right and who was wrong when it came to conflicts of interest? Lin Sung Yip said coldly, "Hand over the invitation. You don't have to go to the 5th Lord Hua's birthday banquet anymore. I'll do it for you." Only the leaders of the major forces were qualified to go to the Supreme Island to celebrate Hua Xingzuan's birthday banquet. This person used to be Xiao Ziki's father. Now, it was naturally him. Hence, the invitation was given to him. It must be said that Hua Xingzuan's prestige in the breezy ocean had reached a certain level. Even attending his birthday banquet had become a symbol of status. However, Chu Xiu's heart skipped a beat. An invitation? Xiao Ziki said coldly, "Dream on." Moreover, the Xiao family's name is written on the invitation. Even if you have the invitation, you won't be able to go to the Supreme Island. A strange smile appeared on Lin Zongye's face. Is that so? But it's very common for the ruler of an island to change. I believe the Hua family will understand. Am I right, young Master Hua? The young master of the Hua family, who had been handing out the invitations in the courtyard, was now standing at the side watching the commotion. Hearing this, he only said lazily, "Old Lin, don't forget to bring me 72 clear dust pearls when you come to the island. If you bring something, I will recognize the invitation. If you don't, even if you bring 100 invitations, it will be useless." When everyone heard this, they immediately knew what was going on. Lin Sungyip was really well prepared. He had already hooked up with the young master of the Hua family. Although the name of the invitation was wrong, which was against the rules, the disciples of the Supreme Island might not take it seriously since the young master Hua had spoken. At this moment, Xiao Ziqi's heart was filled with despair. Lin Sungyip had already planned everything. Was the foundation that his father left behind going to be lost just like that? But suddenly, a voice was heard. If I help you get rid of this old man, how about you bring the two of us when you go to the Supreme Island? Everyone immediately looked at Chu Xiu and Yi Bushuan when they heard the voice. Chu Xiu and Yi Bushuan naturally wouldn't flaunt their true fire spirit refinement state aura when they went to the island. Instead, they concealed their aura. However, people like Xiao Ziqi and Lin Sungyip could tell that Chu Xiu and Yi Bushuan weren't simple at all, because even they couldn't see through them. Therefore, Xiao Ziqi didn't even consider the background of Chu Xiu and the others. He immediately said, "If the two of you can help me, I'll give you anything you want." His family's business was about to be taken away. As long as the other party didn't want his life, he was willing to give them anything they wanted. Lin Sungyip squinted his eyes and said, "People of the Central Plains, this is an overseas dispute. It's best that you don't interfere." The clothes that Chu Xiu and Yi Bushuan were wearing were very different from those of the overseas martialists. Coupled with their accents, it was easy to tell that they were from the Central Plains. Lin Sungyip's tone was filled with fear and threat. However, his heart skipped a beat when he saw the look in Chu Xiu's eyes. This was because Chu Xiu's eyes looked as if he was looking at a dead man. Before Lin Sungyip could speak, Chu Xiu had already used his palm as a blade and slashed out gently. A wisp of black fire condensed in Chu Xiu's blade. It seemed very weak and tiny, and it didn't even emit any energy fluctuations. However, at this moment, the terrifying instinct of being in a life-and-death situation made Lin Sungyip erupt with all his strength. He even burned his essence and blood to resist the weak black fire. However, this was still in vain. That black flame easily burned through his protective Jin Qi and touched his body. In an instant, his entire body was burned into a pile of ashes, leaving no bones behind. Everyone present suddenly fell into silence. They couldn't believe that a martial arts grandmaster of the real pellet state died so easily in the hands of the opponent. Everyone present couldn't help but feel a chill in their hearts, even Yi Bushuan was the same. He was an old man in the demonic path. He had dealt with both Ming Mo and Yin Mo. Most of the people in the demonic path were paranoid and crazy. No matter what they did, it wasn't too much. Therefore, when Yi Bushuan first met Chu Xiu, he actually didn't feel that Chu Xiu was a demonic cultivator. Because although Chu Xiu was ruthless, his opponents were all his enemies. Moreover, Chu Xiu didn't have any strange dark hobbies like other demonic cultivators, nor did he rape, pillage, or kill his enemies. But now Yi Bushuan understood that in the entire demonic path, perhaps he, Chu Xiu, was the person with the deepest demonic nature. Originally, this matter had nothing to do with him. However, because of the invitation, he had jumped out to kill someone. From this, it could be seen what exactly human life represented in Chu Xiu's heart. Perhaps, to him, human life was just a tool, a stepping stone. That was the most terrifying thing, because you didn't know when you would have a conflict of interest with Chu Xiu one day. At that time, he wouldn't kill you so easily. At this time, in the silence, a discordant voice suddenly sounded, "Hey, you killed old Lin. What about the Ming Chen bead he promised to give me? Are you going to compensate me?" The young master of the Hua family spoke first, and there was even extreme dissatisfaction in his tone. The others might be shocked by Chu Xiu's strength, but he wasn't. Since he was young, he had been surrounded by too many strong cultivators. The foster sons of his ancestors were not easy to deal with. Hearing this voice, Chu Xiu frowned. When he looked over, his eyes seemed to be nurturing a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. It was extremely terrifying. The young master of the Hua family was shocked, and he didn't dare to say another word. But at this time, an old man with the strength of true fire spirit refinement realm walked over from afar. The others all respectfully called him Feng. This was one of the current managers of Haotian Island. He was a lone cultivator, but his seniority in terms of seniority was very high. Feng didn't say anything. He only released his own aura and said calmly, "When the strong cultivators of the Central Plains come to our East Sea, the people of the East Sea are warm and hospitable, and we will definitely treat them well. However, if they kill people as soon as they come, we don't dare to treat them well even if we want to." As he said that, Feng's body released a powerful pressure that attacked Chu Xiu. However, a powerful pressure that was 10 times or even 100 times stronger than the previous one descended, causing Feng's eyes to bulge. In less than 3 breaths' time, he couldn't bear the pressure anymore. He shook his head and said, "There are talented people in every generation. I'm old." After saying that, Feng actually turned around and left. Before he left, he said calmly, "There aren't many rules on Haotian Island. When it comes to personal grievances, death is death. However, don't think that anyone can act recklessly on Haotian Island. The East Sea isn't a place where anyone can act recklessly." Chu Xiu was famous among the Central Plains warriors. However, in the East Sea, or rather, in the eyes of a semi-retired martial artist like Feng, he didn't have much of an impression. However, regardless of whether it was the Central Plains or overseas, strength was the best proof of everything. Just that aura alone was enough to make him feel that even if he had been at his peak when he was young, he probably wouldn't have been able to withstand 3 moves from this person before him. Chapter 1007. Strength was the most useful passport, no matter where one was. The Haotian Island was loosely managed. The rules might be useful to others, but to people like Chu Xiu, they were basically useless. Thus, Elder Feng only left a few pleasantries before disappearing. Even the young master of the Hua family dejectedly returned to continue sending out invitations. He no longer felt the heartache over the clear dust pearl that he had yet to obtain. Xiao Ziki came over and cupped his hands in gratitude. "Thank you, Senior, for helping me get rid of this traitor. I am very grateful." Chu Xiu waved his hand casually and said, "You don't have to be so polite. It's just a deal. Don't forget what you promised me." Xiao Ziki nodded and said, "Don't worry, I will take the 2 of you to the 5th Lord Hua's birthday celebration in a few days." In fact, Xiao Ziki was also very puzzled. He could see that the 2 of them were experts in the true fire spirit refining realm. There were only a few experts at this level in the overseas region. Why would such people come to the 5th Lord Hua's birthday celebration? Could it be that the 5th Lord Hua's reputation was so great that it could affect the experts in the Central Plains? Although Xiao Ziki was puzzled, he did not ask much. He just invited Chu Xiu and Ibushuan to wait at his residence. At this time, Ibushuan suddenly asked Chu Xiu through voice transmission, "Official Chu, I don't think there's anything special about this Xiao Ziki. Why did you choose to help him instead of Lin Sungyip? Is it because you hate traitors, Official Chu?" Ibushuan could see that Chu Xiu had killed someone casually because of the invitation. Therefore, it didn't matter who he killed just now. If he helped Lin Sungyip kill Xiao Ziki, he would still get the invitation. Chu Xiu shook his head gently and said, "I don't hate traitors. In fact, many people in the Jianghu say that I, Chu Xiu, am a traitor. It's not the first time I've betrayed my master. Although I don't hate traitors, I don't want to cooperate with idiots." Lin Sungyip was too useless. He thought himself clever and was greedy. According to him, he had been in charge of all the affairs of the Long Gorge Island for so many years, while Xiao Ziki only focused on cultivation. Therefore, even if he was not the island lord, his prestige must be higher than Xiao Ziki's. This matter could have been carried out step by step. He could have secretly schemed to make the entire Long Gorge Island fall out with Xiao Ziki and ruin his reputation. Then, he would be forced to become the island lord. But in the end, Lin Sungyip insisted on taking it by force. Obviously, he was a greedy and stupid guy. All humans are greedy. I can cooperate with greedy people, and I can tolerate greed, but I can't tolerate a greedy idiot. Hearing Chu Xiu's words, Yi Bushuan broke out in a cold sweat. Lin Sungyip was lucky to have met Xiao Ziki, a guy who only had strength but had no experience in scheming. If he had met Chu Xiu, he would have been cheated until not even his bones were left. Of course, not even his bones were left now. At this moment, a voice suddenly rang out. I didn't expect to meet the famous official Chu in the East Sea, as well as sect leader Yi Bushuan of the Sixth Demon Sect. What an honor. Chu Xiu and Yi Bushuan both looked back in surprise. They didn't expect someone to recognize them in a place like this. The speaker was a middle-aged man in purple with an extraordinary aura. This middle-aged man also had the strength of the true fire spirit refinement realm. His aura was condensed and abnormally dense. Seeing Chu Xiu and Yi Bushuan, he greeted them with cupped hands. Every move he made was filled with a sense of grandeur. Before Chu Xiu and Yi Bushuan could ask, the man took the initiative and said, I am Pak Dong Lai. I run some small businesses in the East Sea. It's normal that you haven't heard of me. Yi Bushuan smiled and said, Tianyishui Hall Pavilion Master, Purple Air from the East, Pak Dong Lai is famous. Who doesn't know of him? Moreover, if Tianyishui Hall is only a small business, then all the shops in the East Sea can only be described as street stalls. As Yi Bushuan said this, he secretly introduced Pak Dong Lai to Chu Xiu. This person was born in the wilderness. In his early years, he brought a few small boats to the Windbreaker Sea in search of treasures and opportunities. After he accumulated some savings, he built Tianyishui Hall on various islands in the East Sea. He sold all kinds of rare treasures, weapons, elixirs, cultivation methods, ancient books, and so on. At the same time, he also bought some resources from rogue cultivators. Because Pak Dong Lai's Tianyishui Hall was fair and honest, even when he bought some items from rogue cultivators, he would try his best to give a higher price. Therefore, in the East Sea, Pak Dong Lai had a good reputation. Moreover, he was a righteous person. If anyone encountered difficulties and asked for help from Tianyishui Hall, as long as it was not too excessive, the Tianyishui Hall on each island would help as much as possible. Although there were some people who took advantage of him, most people were grateful to him. In short, this person was also a big shot in the East Sea. Pak Dong Lai asked, both of you are big shots in the Central Plains warriors. May I know why you have come to the East Sea this time? Chu Xiu smiled and said, I have long heard of the name of the fifth Lord Hua of the East Sea Supreme Island. This time, we have come to congratulate the fifth Lord Hua on his birthday. Pak Dong Lai only smiled and said, that's great. I will also attend the fifth Lord Hua's birthday. We will see you then. If the two of you don't mind, after the fifth Lord Hua's birthday, you can also come to my Tianyishui Hall as a guest. After exchanging some pleasantries, Pak Dong Lai turned and left. After Pak Dong Lai left, Yi Bushuan asked, Official Chu, what do you think of this person? Chu Xiu said calmly, he seems to be generous and forthright, but in fact, he is very thoughtful and knows his limits. They were both experienced and astute people. Pak Dong Lai might be able to deceive others, but he could not deceive Chu Xiu. Since the other party knew them, he should have noticed Chu Xiu when Chu Xiu stood out to kill people. In the end, he only came out after Chu Xiu killed the people and Feng was scared away. He pretended to be surprised and did not want to get involved in trouble. Moreover, Chu Xiu said that he had only come to celebrate the fifth Lord Hua's birthday. Even an idiot would not believe him. If Pak Dong Lai was really generous and forthright, he would definitely flick his sleeves and leave on the spot. However, he seemed to really believe it and did not even say a word of doubt. Moreover, he could also guess that Chu Xiu was wary of him. Therefore, after exchanging a few pleasantries, he turned around and left. He did not continue to be entangled here. That was why Chu Xiu said that he knew his limits. Yi Bushuan said with a smile, Pak Dong Lai has a good reputation in this area of the Breeze Sea. I don't think many people will believe what you said about him. Chu Xiu said expressionlessly, those who really believe in it are either those inexperienced youths, or they're really stupid. Pak Donglai has such strength now and his Tianyishui Hall has such influence now. If this person is not scheming enough, I'm afraid he would have been tricked to death long ago. Although that was what he said, Chu Xiu did not care about Pak Donglai. He did not have any enmity towards Chu Xiu and Ibushuan. He was just curious and testing them out. He wanted to make friends with them. The two of them were big shots among the Central Plains warriors. In particular, Chu Xiu had suddenly come to the East Sea. As long as someone recognized them, it would definitely arouse suspicion. Therefore, it was not strange for Pak Donglai to test them out. Moreover, for people like Pak Donglai, networking and other things had almost become a habit. When he met Chu Xiu and Yi Bushuan, two experts who did not have a direct conflict of interest with him, he subconsciously wanted to get to know them. Even if he could not help him, it was still good to have such connections. The two of them followed Xiao Ziki to his residence on Haotian Island. A few days later, when the birthday of the fifth Lord Hua began, they were ready to leave. During this period of time, Xiao Ziki had indeed suspected that Chu Xiu and Yi Bushuan insisted on attending the birthday of the fifth Lord Hua. He wondered if they had ulterior motives and whether they would implicate him. However, Xiao Ziki dared not ask or say these things. If it were not for Chu Xiu, his foundation would have been occupied by Lin Sungyip. Of course, the most important thing was that based on how easily Chu Xiu killed Lin Sungyip as if he was crushing an ant, Xiao Ziki had no doubt that he would end up the same if he did anything. Before Xiao Ziki reached the real pellet state, his father told him that as long as he broke through to the real pellet state, he could become the overlord of an island. Now that he had reached the real pellet state, he found that in the face of a powerhouse like Chu Xiu, the real pellet state was just a slightly stronger ant. This truth even made Xiao Ziki lose his mind for a while. The big ship was approaching the Supreme Island, and there were many ships heading towards the Supreme Island. They were obviously preparing to celebrate the birthday of the fifth Lord Hua. After going ashore, Chu Xiu also sized up the Supreme Island. The Supreme Island wasn't too big, but the scenery was beautiful, and the chi of heaven and earth was extremely abundant. It could be said to be a treasure land. The buildings on the island were extremely luxurious. In Chu Xiu's opinion, they were even more luxurious than the Northern Yen. The building in the center of the island was no longer a house, but a small palace. With Xiao Ziki carrying the invitation, it was easy to enter the palace. However, at this time, Chu Xiu and the others didn't notice that there were several pairs of eyes watching them from the other side of the palace. The young master of the Hua family that Chu Xiu had met before was standing there. There were two other people standing beside him. One of them was dressed in battle armor and had a ferocious and fierce appearance. He gave off an intimidating feeling without being angry. There was another person who was even stranger. He was actually sitting cross-legged in the air, completely supported by his stellar energy. However, upon closer inspection, one would discover that he was not maintaining such a strange posture. Instead, it was because he did not have legs. Chapter 1008. The people who were secretly observing Chu Xiu and the others were none other than Hua Xingzuan's second foster son, Bailey Paubing, the owner of Divine Weapon Island, and his fourth foster son, Nalan Hai. Bailey Paubing grabbed the Hua family's young master and brought him in front of him. He asked loudly, "Kid, you're saying that these two fellows deliberately killed people in order to attend foster father's birthday celebration? That's how they obtained the invitation?" Young Master Hua nodded and said, "That's right, it's the two of them. They seem to be some big shots of the Central Plains warriors." Bailey Paubing turned his gaze to Nalan Hai and asked, "The fourth prince, you usually like to study these messy news. You should know the Central Plains warriors the best. What's the background of these two fellas? Foster father's birthday is such a joyous occasion, we can't let them disturb it." Nalan Hai's appearance was that of a young man with a pale face. His hair was disheveled, but the gloominess in his eyes did not dissipate no matter what. The fifth Lord Hua's foster sons were all dragons and phoenixes among men. Nalan Hai used to be one, but now, he was a crippled dragon and phoenixes among men. Kang Dongming's strength was almost invincible among those below the heaven and earth mysterious realm. He was so powerful that it made people feel hopeless. Even if the fifth lord was foster sons attacked him together, they might not be able to defeat him. Moreover, the fifth lord was foster sons each had their own thoughts. They were all the fifth lord was foster sons, but they were not brothers. For example, Zhao Yuanfeng knew that Kang Dongming had injured him, but he still dared to use Kang Dongming as his follower. Among the fifth lord was foster sons, he was only close to Bailey Pobing. The young master Hua glanced at Nalan Hai cautiously. Of course, the fifth lord was foster sons were all people he could not afford to offend. The fifth lord Hua treated them better than his own sons. However, young master Hua was not afraid of the ferocious Bailey Pobing. Instead, he was afraid of the taciturn Nalan Hai. Hearing this, Nalan Hai said indifferently, strictly speaking, the one in the black robe and mask is not a martial artist from the Central Plains. He is the leader of the sixth demon sect in the South China Sea, Yi Bushuan. As for that young man, if I'm not mistaken, he should be the strongest person in the Yinma clan on the surface. He is also its leader, the leader of the subduing martial hall, Chu Xiu. He is definitely a big shot in the Central Plains warriors. He is in charge of the Yinma clan, and all the forces in the Northern Yan martial world regard him as the supreme leader. Although he is not the leader of the Guanzhong torture room in name, he is his puppet. One of the four spirits, the former leader of the Blue Dragon Society, Bu Tiannan, was killed. In the end, the Blue Dragon Society did not avenge him. Instead, it was controlled by the murderer. The information that Nalan Hai said was not new to the Central Plains warriors. Almost everyone knew about it. However, it was not easy to have such detailed information about Chu Xiu in the overseas area. Bailey Pobing was speechless. He said, "This guy has such a powerful background. The Yinma clan is not worried at all. How could they hand over such a big foundation to such a young man?" Nalan Hai squinted his eyes and said, "In the Jianghu, apart from distinguishing one's seniority, is there any other meaning to age? As long as one is powerful enough, what foundation can't he get? The fourth prince, I think this guy is up to no good when he comes to celebrate his godfather's birthday. He is a big shot of the Devil Path in the Central Plains. What is he doing in the East Sea? Anyway, none of the warriors in the Central Plains are good people. How about this, before the birthday celebration starts, I will find a reason to kick him out." In the past, before Bailey Pobing became the fifth lord Hua's adopted son, he had gone to the Central Plains to make a living. No one knew what happened at that time. However, it was said that Bailey Pobing suffered a great loss. Therefore, as long as he met warriors from the Central Plains, even if they did not provoke him, they would be easily beaten up by him. Nalan Hai glanced at him and said, "This is my godfather's birthday celebration. He hasn't done anything yet. What are you so anxious about? If you act rashly, the one who will be kicked out might not be Chu Xiu, but you. Keep an eye on him and observe the situation. Remember, this is the outer endless sea, the supreme island. This is our territory, not Chu Xiu's." Although that was what Nalan Hai said, he still had doubts in his heart. He remembered that Eastern Qi had already started to attack the Northern Yan. This Chu Xiu had close relations with the Northern Yan royalty. Even the Northern Yan royalty was helped onto the throne by him. Did he come to the East Sea have something to do with this? At that moment, Chu Xiu had already followed Xiao Ziki into the hall. It was an extraordinarily gorgeous hall, with tables and seats placed around it. However, Xiao Ziki was in a dilemma. There were only a limited number of true fire spirit refinement state experts in the breezy sea. Therefore, there were also a limited number of seats at the front that were specially prepared for true fire spirit refinement state experts. With Xiao Ziki's strength and influence, he could only sit in the middle. However, Chu Xiu and Yi Bushuan were genuine true fire spirit refinement state experts. Did they have to sit with him? Fortunately, this time, Chu Xiu was here to find someone to work with and not to look for trouble. Therefore, he did not argue over a seat. He simply said, "Sit down." About an hour later, the hall was filled with people. There were 5 seats at the front, but only 3 people were seated. Those 5 seats were naturally reserved for Huixingzuan's 5 adopted sons. Even his own sons did not have this kind of treatment. The first seat was already empty. It was reserved for his eldest son, Qiu Tianya. Although Qiu Tianya had been missing for 50 years, he still had a seat at Huixingzuan's birthday celebration. The second seat was the island master of Divine Weapon Island, Bailey Paobing. For some reason, Chu Xiu always felt that Bailey Paobing was looking at him. The third seat was the master of the Blue Dragon Fleet, Fu Longshao. This person wore a brocade robe with dragon patterns and had an imposing appearance. He was also the strongest among the 3. The fourth seat was Nalan Hai. However, he always had a kind of unapproachable aura, which made people fear him. The fifth seat was also empty now. This seat was naturally reserved for Zhao Yuanfeng. At this moment, a loud voice came from outside, "The fifth lord is here." As the voice came, an old man with white hair and beard, dressed in luxurious clothes, walked into the hall surrounded by a group of children and grandchildren. Hearing this voice, everyone present turned their eyes to the fifth Lord Hua. Even Chu Xiu's eyes were attracted. He was really curious about who this fifth Lord Hua was. His eyesight could actually reach such a level. However, at first glance, Chu Xiu was a little disappointed. Ordinary, too ordinary. For most martial artists, not to mention the true fire spirit refinement state, even the real pellet state was something that could only be encountered by chance. However, in the eyes of people at Chu Xiu's level, there were also differences in the true fire spirit refinement state. The Sun family's ancestor and the Lu family's ancestor who died in his hands before belonged to the mediocre type. Not long ago in the Guanzhong torture room, Meiko Mori, Nangong Weiyu, and Helian Changfeng were all defeated by him, but it was not because he was too weak, but because Chu Xiu was too strong. Individually, the 3 of them were not easy to deal with. On Huixingzuan, Chu Xiu did not see too many anomalies. On the contrary, in his opinion, this Huixingzuan was even a little weak. There was not much evil aura on his body, which proved that he had not fought with others for a long time. Even when his combat power was at its peak, he rarely fought with others, so his combat power should not be high. Moreover, Huixingzuan's body exuded an extremely strong aura. It was so strong that it was a little abnormal. This proved that he often used various elixirs and natural treasures as tonics, and the tonics were a little too much, even to the point that it was emitted through his aura. Also, the aura around his body was different from the ordinary true fire spirit refinement state martial artists. True fire spirit refinement state used the power of the spirit to trigger the power of heaven and earth. Every move was in line with the power of heaven and earth. This was a subconscious move. For example, if it was raining now, the existence of true fire spirit refinement state like Chu Xiu, even if he didn't use true qi to block the raindrops would involuntarily deviate and avoid them. However, the aura around Huixingzuan's body was very chaotic, as if he couldn't control this power at all. Could it be that even the power of the true fire spirit refinement realm was obtained from an external object? But what external objects could allow someone to step into true fire spirit refinement state? While Chu Xiu was thinking, Huixingzuan had already walked to the main seat and sat down. He cupped his hands and said with a smile, "Time passes really quickly. I didn't expect that in the blink of an eye, I would already be 380 years old. This birthday. Every time we celebrate it, we get older. In a few more years, perhaps everyone will have to attend Ai's funeral." Someone immediately said, "What are you talking about, Fifth Lord? The Eastern Sea is fortunate to have the protection of the Fifth Lord. The Fifth Lord will definitely live on for tens of thousands of years." That's right. All these years, the Fifth Lord has blessed the Eastern Sea. How could the heavens let the Fifth Lord leave just like that? The Fifth Lord will definitely have a long life of good fortune. A series of flattering words came from the audience. They sounded very mushy, but everyone knew that the Fifth Lord Hua actually loved to hear such words. When people get old, they all fear death, and Huixingzuan was even more so. Although he kept saying that he didn't have long to live, if someone said those unlucky words in front of him, he would be very unhappy. Waving his hand, Huixingzuan said with a smile, all right, I have already been blessed by the heavens for being able to live until now. If I continue living, I will really become an old man. Originally, I didn't plan to celebrate this birthday, and planned to celebrate it when I'm 388 years old. However, I'm afraid that I won't be able to see all of you after another 8 years. Therefore, I brought it forward a little so that I can have some fun with all of you. At this time, the third son of Huixingzuan, Fu Longxiao, was the first to step forward. He bowed and said, "Don't worry, foster father. After 8 years, I will definitely hold an even bigger birthday banquet for you, and invite some of the powerful experts in the windbreaking sea." This time, I went to the windbreaking sea and brought back a sea bodhi. The fruit it bore was actually a longevity peach. Clearly, the heavens are preparing a congratulatory gift for you, foster father. With that, Fu Longxiao waved his hand and ordered someone to bring the congratulatory gift. However, at this moment, Chu Xiu clearly noticed that Bailey Paubing and Nalan Hai's expressions had turned gloomy. Chapter 1009. From Zhao Yuanfeng's incident, Chu Xiu could tell that the relationship between Huixingzuan's foster sons was not harmonious. Now, it was even more obvious. According to the ranking, Qiu Tianya had disappeared, so Bailey Paubing was the leader. Therefore, if he wanted to speak and present a congratulatory gift, he should have been the first to speak. But now, Fu Longxiao had taken the lead. Moreover, Fu Longxiao was very good at business. His Blue Dragon fleet traveled between the Windbreaker Sea and the Breezy Sea, bringing in a huge amount of resource trading revenue every time. Although Bailey Paubing was also the master of an island, he was just a boorish fellow. Before Kong Dongming crippled his legs, Nalan Hai had some tricks up his sleeves. Unfortunately, after his legs were crippled, he was unable to recover. He lived in seclusion on a nameless island with only a few servants serving him. He could not be said to have any influence. Therefore, among Huixingzuan's foster sons, Fu Longxiao was the strongest. After Fu Longxiao, Bailey Paubing and Nalan Hai presented their gifts. However, compared to Fu Longxiao's sea bodhi, their gifts were much shabbier. Bailey Paubing presented a godly weapon. Seeing this, Chu Xiu shook his head slightly. After being someone else's foster son for so many years, how could he not see what level Huixingzuan was? Even if you gave him Listen to Spring Rain, Huixingzuan probably wouldn't take a liking to it. It was useless. As for Nalan Hai, what he presented was even shabbier. It turned out to be a calligraphy and painting he wrote. However, the calligraphy and painting were full of sword qi. It was obvious that Nalan Hai had put a lot of thought into it. It could even be said that a real pellet state martial artist could use this calligraphy and painting as a martial arts secret manual. However, it was still useless for Huixingzuan. So for these two people, Huixingzuan just smiled gently. He was not as happy as when he received Fu Longxiao's birthday gift. After the three presented their gifts, the rest handed the gifts to the Hua family servants in order, and then the other party read out the names. In fact, the gifts given by the servants were very ordinary. Basically, there was nothing too outrageous. As long as it was not too bad, it was fine. Huixingzuan held a birthday celebration every few years. Who would have the financial resources to prepare so many heavenly materials and earthly treasures every time? When it was Chu Xiu's turn, the servant of the Hua family looked at what Chu Xiu handed to him, and he was slightly taken aback. It turned out to be something like a blueprint, but after seeing the explanation on it, he was so shocked that he almost shouted out. He calmed his emotions and shouted, "Long Gorge Island's Xiao Ziki presents a relic weapon blueprint." Because Chu Xiu came with Xiao Ziki's invitation, the servant of the Hua family didn't know Chu Xiu, so the name he read was also Xiao Ziki's. But when they heard this, the people present suddenly exploded. Relic weapon blueprint? This Xiao Ziki isn't good enough? How could he take out such a thing as a birthday gift? Whether it was in the Central Plains or overseas, relic weapon blueprints were extremely precious. It could even be said that relic weapon blueprints were more expensive than relic weapons. The reason was very simple. It was because relic weapons could not be replicated. 99% of weapon refinement grandmasters could forge a relic weapon, but if you asked them to forge an identical relic weapon, it could be said to be extremely difficult. It could even be said to be basically impossible. Part of the reason for forging a relic weapon was the materials. Weapon refinement grandmaster's level was another, and luck was another. Therefore, relic weapons could not be mass-produced because luck was something that no one could predict. But now, what Chu Xiu took out was the blueprint of the Heavenly War case. This thing was between a mechanism and a weapon. As long as there were enough materials and it was completely forged according to the blueprint, it would definitely be a relic weapon, the kind that could be completely replicated. This kind of thing was much more precious. In fact, in history, there were only a few relic weapons like the Heavenly War case that could be replicated. They might not be the strongest relic weapon, but they were the most stable. Therefore, such a blueprint was even more precious than a relic weapon. Now that Chu Xiu no longer needed the Heavenly War case, there was no harm in taking it out as a congratulatory gift. Most importantly, if the Heavenly War case was used as an ordinary weapon, it would even be weaker than most relic weapons. Only with the Black Tortoise True technique, the Heavenly War case would be the real Heavenly War case. Of course, Chu Xiu would not hand over the Black Tortoise True technique so easily. At this moment, seeing that everyone's eyes were on Chu Xiu, Xiao Ziki hurriedly said, "Everyone, this congratulatory gift is not from me, but from official Chu." Everyone immediately turned their eyes to Chu Xiu. Only a few people present knew him, and most of them were still wondering who this person was. At this time, Pak Donglai, the pavilion leader of Tainishui Hall whom Chu Xiu had met before, stood out and said, "This is Lord Chu Xiu of the Central Plains. In the Central Plains, he is also a famous diabolism overlord, and even controls a country's wuling." As he spoke, Pak Donglai briefly introduced the identity of Chu Xiu to everyone. Although it was a brief introduction, it still surprised everyone present. This person was really a big shot. The overseas region was much more realistic than the Central Plains, and there were not many differences between the Orthodox and the Devil. Therefore, they did not object to Chu Xiu's identity as a diabolism cultivator. In the Central Plains, the Orthodox and the Devil were divided into two. Chu Xiu controlled half of the diabolism, and he even controlled the Jianghu forces of a country. This was a rather shocking power. Bailey Paubing and Nalan Hai, who were above, looked at each other, their eyes filled with doubt. What was Chu Xiu doing here? Why did he give such a precious birthday gift to foster father? They subconsciously turned their eyes to Huixingzuan, but they found that Huixingzuan was looking at Chu Xiu in a daze, as if he was looking at some rare treasure, and his eyes were even shining slightly. At this moment, Huixingzuan was indeed very excited. In his eyes, Chu Xiu was indeed a rare treasure, the kind that he had never seen or heard of before. As the most powerful person in the entire breezy ocean, it could even be said that Huixingzuan did not directly say that he was the master of the entire breezy ocean. The reason why he had such a status today was because of his 5 foster sons. Huixingzuan had never denied this. Therefore, many people suspected that he was proficient in the art of divination, that he was a great grandmaster, or that he had some kind of rare treasure on him. However, they had all guessed wrong. Huixingzuan did not know the art of divination. He did not even understand the cultivation of the martial way, let alone something as advanced as the art of divination. He did not have any rare treasure on him either. In fact, it should be said that his luck had never been very good. He had never even opened a secret box and found anything good. However, he was able to achieve what he had today by relying on an opportunity, an enormous opportunity. Huixingzuan was not originally a cultivator. He was only the son of a fisherman on a small island, and it was possible that he had nothing to do with the martial way in this life. However, when he was young, something had completely changed his fate. It was when Huixingzuan was in his teens. He was drying his fishing net on the shore, when a man in white robes, who looked like an immortal, came treading on the water. Under Huixingzuan's shocked gaze, the man asked him for directions. Huixingzuan had told him. The immortal had patted his head, thanked him, and left. From then on, Huixingzuan felt that his body had become much lighter and stronger. He had even been valued by an island lord who had passed by and had been taken in as a follower. After he had started cultivating the martial way, he had discovered that his body had undergone some changes. As long as he concentrated on looking at a person, he would be able to see a ray of light from that person's body. Some were bright, some were dark. Later, as he had slowly explored, he had discovered that people who had a bright ray of light would definitely have extraordinary achievements in the future. They might even be able to soar into the sky one day. As for those who had a dim ray of light, they might be unlucky at any time, no matter how glorious they were. At that time, he had discovered that he could actually see a person's future luck. This kind of luck was very blurry, and he could only see it once. He was not sure if the person's luck would decrease after the person's luck increased. However, the more he saw, the more he could judge how far the person would go in the future based on the intensity of the ray of light. Therefore, Huixingzuan relied on his own opportunities to cling on to some people who seemed to be in dire straits now, but would have a rising destiny in the future. Huixingzuan would gain their trust, and when they rose, he would also follow them to the heavens. Therefore, even if Huixingzuan's martial arts talent was not the kind of amazing, he was still living a good life, and his path had been smooth sailing. What happened after that was much simpler. Huixingzuan met Qiu Tianya, who was still a teenager. The light on Qiu Tianya's body was so blinding that Huixingzuan's eyes hurt. Hence, Huixingzuan decisively took Qiu Tianya as his godson and raised him for tens of years. Finally, Qiu Tianya reached the peak and helped him build the foundation of the Supreme Island. Later on, he met Bailey Paobing and the others, and he took them in as his foster sons before they were famous in Jianghu. Although the rays of light from them were much dimmer than Qiu Tianya's, they were already the brightest among all the people he had met. Relying on his ability to read people, Huixingzuan managed to get to where he was today. He had seen the rays of light from his own children, but they were all extremely dim. It was obvious that they were not important figures. Therefore, there were rumors in the outside world that he treated his adopted sons better than his own. This was indeed true, because he only had these few adopted sons to rely on. As for his descendants, even if they were his own, none of them lived up to his expectations. This was Huixingzuan's deepest secret. He did not even tell his wife and son about it. All this while, Huixingzuan had thought that he was a person favored by the heavens. When the immortal touched my head, I tied my hair and received eternal life. The person he met in the past must have been the legendary immortal. He had always been making use of the opportunities given by the immortal. Today, he felt that his opportunity had arrived again. He also saw a strong ray of light from Chu Xiu, but it was different from Bailey Paobing and the others. It was also different from Qiu Tianya's. In the instant that he used his mind to look at Chu Xiu, he thought that he saw the sun. Chapter 10:10. At this moment, Chu Xiu did not know that Huixingzuan was thinking so much at this moment. He had presented such an expensive gift to attract the attention of others. And now, he had achieved his goal. However, at this moment, Nalanhai spoke in an ambiguous tone. Official Chu came all the way from Eastern Qi to my breezy sea. I'm afraid it's not as simple as celebrating foster father's birthday, right? Foster father has had so many birthday parties, but why haven't I seen official Chu come before? Upon hearing this, everyone present was stunned. Previously, they were shocked by Chu Xiu's identity and did not think of this point. The Central Plains and the overseas territories were mainly trade between them and not to take root in the overseas territories. Who would be so bored to come and present gifts to Huixingzuan? Not to mention the Central Plains, even the Windbreak Sea, which was close to the Breezy Sea, had never been here before. Just now, Fu Longshao said that he could invite the big shots and experts of the Windbreak Sea region to celebrate Huixingzuan's birthday. This was already a great honor for him. Chu Xiu waved his hand and said, "One doesn't visit without a cause. I'm here this time because I have something to discuss with the fifth Lord Hua. I'm sure everyone has heard about the dispute between the Central Plains warriors. Eastern Qi has started a war, and the Central Plains warriors are in a state of chaos. This time, I'm here to seek the cooperation of the Eastern Sea and attack Eastern Qi from behind. After staying on the island for so long, don't you want to try going ashore? Everyone present had different expressions. No one expected Chu Xiu to have such a grand plan in his trip to the Eastern Sea. Most of the martial artists in the Eastern Sea knew about the news of Eastern Qi. The martial artists in the Eastern Sea could ignore the Central Plains warriors, but they couldn't ignore the trade that concerned them. The war that Eastern Qi had started this time involved too many people. Everywhere was under martial law, and even the trade to the Eastern Sea had been delayed. Some of the cultivation resources in the Central Plains had never been produced by the East Sea. They had to rely on trade between the two sides to obtain them. But now, they were very scarce. In the past, Jiangshan Pavilion was in charge of this business. Now that Jiangshan Pavilion had gone to the Central Plains to establish a new country, the number of businessmen in Eastern Qi had decreased by a lot, which made them very anxious. However, at this moment, Naylan Hai said coldly, "Official Chu, please go back. The warriors of the Eastern Sea have always been used to freedom. We do not wish to get involved in the turmoil of the Central Plains warriors. Even if you personally come to ask for help, we will not agree." Chu Xiu waved his hand and said, "You're wrong. I'm not here to ask for help. As I said before, I'm here to ask for cooperation." Before Chu Xiu could say anything, Naylan Hai waved his hand and said, "We don't need cooperation either." A cold glint flashed in Chu Xiu's eyes. It had been a long time since anyone had dared to interrupt him. At this moment, Hua Xingzuan waved his hand and said, "The fourth prince, he's a guest from afar. Let him finish what he wants to say." When Naylan Hai heard that his godfather had already spoken, he didn't dare to say anything else. However, Naylan Hai was a little puzzled. Why was his godfather treating Chu Xiu so kindly? It had to be known that his godfather had always been hostile to the martial artists of the Central Plains. Hua Xingzuan was the overlord of the Cool Breeze Sea, the invisible ruler. What he was most worried about was that someone would shake his authority. Such people were most likely to appear in the Central Plains. After all, the distance between the two places was not far. Chu Xiu said in a deep voice, "Fifth Lord Hua, whether it's the Central Plains or overseas, we only seek one thing, benefits. With all due respect, although the overseas territories are not weak, they are definitely not strong either. Therefore, if the overseas territories dared to cause trouble in the Eastern Qi martial arts world, they would most likely suffer heavy casualties and be beaten back. They might even seal off trade. When that time comes, the overseas territories would be the ones to suffer. But now it's different. The Central Plains warriors are in chaos. This matter was instigated by Eastern Qi. Eastern Qi's defenses in the entire East Sea are now empty. If you take this opportunity to occupy a few counties, or even control the coast of Eastern Qi, it won't be difficult. Moreover, with the Northern Yan Imperial Court and all the forces of the Devil Path keeping them in check, I guarantee that Eastern Qi won't be able to find the strength to go back to support them in a short time. This matter is almost in the bag. Everyone, attacking the outside is better than attacking the inside, right? Moreover, we won't be able to gain anything from the inside." When they heard Chu Xiu's words, most of the people present were tempted. It should be said that some forces near the coast had tried to step into the Central Plains warriors, but they had all met with tragic ends. This was not only because of the forces of the martial arts world in the Central Plains, but also because of the Eastern Qi Imperial Court's strict defense. After all, the overseas lands were all islands. They didn't have some resources, so they had to rely on the Central Plains to obtain them. As for the Central Plains, some of the special products of the overseas lands were dispensable. It was easy to find something to replace them. Therefore, the overseas land's desire for the Central Plains was extremely high. Of course, this matter still depended on the Fifth Lord Hua's opinion. A snake could not be without a head. If the overseas people charged forward like a mass of loose sand, even if Eastern Qi didn't have much power to defend the coast, they still wouldn't be able to break through. Only when the forces of the entire overseas lands were linked together could they break through the Eastern Qi's defense. And now, the person with the greatest power and prestige in the entire overseas lands was the fifth Lord Hua. At this time, Nalan Hai snorted coldly and said, "Chu Xiu, your words are better than your singing. Do you really think no one knows about your situation in the Central Plains? The forces of the East Sea attacked the border of Eastern Qi's coast and put pressure on Eastern Qi, but in the end, you were the one who benefited. This is equivalent to us helping you share the burden, but you are here talking about cooperation. What a joke." Chu Xiu frowned. This Nalan Hai had always been against him. Previously, Chu Xiu thought that he had unintentionally offended him, but now it seemed that this person was purely dark and suspicious, and would subconsciously doubt everyone. Chu Xiu didn't find it strange that this kind of person had his legs chopped off by Kang Dongming. Chu Xiu had come into contact with Kang Dongming before. He was a person who had nothing but a sword. With Kang Dongming's character, he would never take the initiative to conflict with anyone. When Kang Dongming attacked Nalan Hai, it must be because this guy kept blocking Kang Dongming's way, which forced Kang Dongming to attack. Even now, Chu Xiu couldn't help but want to attack and cripple his two arms. Chu Xiu said lightly, "Island Master Nalan's words are wrong. I benefit, but don't tell me you don't benefit. When doing something, don't look at how much others benefit. No matter how much others benefit, it is still others. First, you have to look at whether you will suffer a loss or gain, isn't that right? If you attack Eastern Qi, I will be the only one who benefits, but you will be the one who loses. Then, I will be using you. But if we attack now, both of us will benefit. If this isn't cooperation, what is it?" Nalan Hai still wanted to say something, but Chu Xiu said indifferently, "May I ask, is the ruler of Supreme Island the fifth Lord Hua or you, Nalan Hai? It seems that I gave this gift to the wrong person. It should be given to you, Island Master Nalan, and not to the fifth Lord Hua." Nalan Hai's expression suddenly changed. He just realized that he had indeed overstepped his boundaries just now. The fifth Lord Hua didn't say much. He was the only one talking. Even the disciples of the Hua family looked at him unkindly. "Chu Xiu, don't try to sow discord between my godfather and me." Chu Xiu spread out his hands and said, "The fifth Lord Hua hasn't rejected it yet, and you're already rejecting it on his behalf. I'm not trying to sow discord. This is the truth." Just as Nalan Hai was about to say something, the fifth Lord Hua waved his hand and said, "All right, the fourth prince, don't speak for now." Nalan Hai retreated to the side with a gloomy face. The fifth Lord Hua looked at Chu Xiu with a kind gaze. Does Chu really need the help of the East Sea? Chu Xiu didn't hide anything. He said directly, "If we fight head-on, my side might not lose, but we will suffer great losses. If we join forces with the martial artists of the East Sea to attack Eastern Qi will definitely lose. Therefore, if I don't need the martial artists of the East Sea to make a move, I wouldn't have come here personally." The fifth Lord Hua nodded and said, "All right, I agree to this matter." When he said this, not only were the others shocked, but even Chu Xiu was shocked. He didn't expect the fifth Lord Hua to agree so quickly. However, at this time, the fifth Lord Hua suddenly said, "However, I have another request. As long as you can agree to it, Chu, I will immediately gather my men and attack Eastern Qi." "What request?" Chu Xiu wasn't surprised by the fifth Lord Hua's request. If the fifth Lord Hua had agreed so simply, Chu Xiu would have been surprised. The fifth Lord Hua looked at Chu Xiu, and there was an unconcealable look of surprise in his eyes. "Chu, you've come all the way from a humble background. You're definitely one of the most outstanding people in the world, and I am also very excited. In the entire overseas region, I can be considered to have some fame and influence, and I'm much older than you, Chu. Why don't we do this? Today, in front of everyone, I will accept you as my godson. From now on, we'll all be family, and there won't be any need to work together. When a family member is in trouble, how can I not help? Moreover, you don't have to worry about being bound to the East Sea after you become I's godson. Although I is old, I'm still very open-minded. If Qiu Tianya wants to pursue the pinnacle of swordsmanship, I won't stop him. If Zhao Yuanfeng wants to go back to the Central Plains to build his country, I won't stop him either. After solving the problem of Eastern Qi, if Chu wants to go back to the Central Plains, I won't stop you either. What do you think, Chu? The fifth Lord Hua still had a kind smile on his face, as if he was waiting for Chu Xiu to bow down to him. However, he didn't notice that the smile on Chu Xiu's face was gradually disappearing. Chapter 10-11. Everyone present really didn't expect the request of the fifth Lord Hua. They couldn't have guessed that the fifth Lord Hua was already so old, yet he still wanted to accept a godson. Most importantly, this godson was different from his previous ones. Among the godson accepted by the fifth Lord Hua before, the strongest one at the beginning should be Fu Longshao. At that time, he was already a famous pirate who had reached the real pellet state. He accidentally plundered the ship of the Hua family, but he was valued by the fifth Lord Hua and accepted as a godson. There was also Zhao Yuanfeng. Although he was not the patriarch at that time, he was also at the real pellet state. But Chu Xiu was now a famous big shot in the underworld. It could be said that his status was not much worse than Hua Xingzuan's. Now that you accepted him as a godson, no matter how you looked at it, it felt like you were taking advantage of him. They didn't know what Hua Xingzuan saw. In the eyes of Hua Xingzuan, Chu Xiu's future achievements would be even higher than his current achievements. Accepting him as a godson, the benefits were simply immeasurable. However, Hua Xingzuan had neglected one point, and that was that people's thoughts were different at different stages of life. Now if he wanted to accept Fu Longshao, who was already the master of the Blue Dragon Fleet, as a godson, Fu Longshao might not agree, let alone Chu Xiu. His own father was killed by Chu Xiu, not to mention that he had to acknowledge a godson now. So Chu Xiu stood up directly and said faintly, "It seems that the fifth Lord Hua still doesn't want to cooperate with me. Well, I will leave now." Hua Xingzuan frowned and said, "Chu, with eyes strength in this Qingfeng Sea, it shouldn't be a disgrace to you, right? You refused without even considering it? Moreover, everyone in the Cool Breeze Sea knows that I, Hua Xingzuan, treat my godson better than my own. If it wasn't for me, who would be able to reach this stage? When you were in the Central Plains warriors, you were targeted by the righteous sections. If you acknowledge me as your adoptive father, the entire breezy ocean will be your backup." Chu Xiu said faintly, "Fifth Lord Hua, I've told you that I'm here to cooperate with you, not to beg for help. Besides, I'm not interested in finding myself another father." Hearing this, Nailan Hai and the other two's expressions darkened. What did he mean by finding another father? Chu Xiu's words included all three of them. Hua Xingzuan's patience was running out. He snorted coldly and said, "Cooperate? Could it be that you want to become sworn brothers with I? The overseas region is different from the Central Plains. I don't believe in agreements or anything like that. I only believe in my own people. Only my own people, I dare to help them unconditionally, regardless of whether it's a loss or a gain. Let me ask you one last time. Are you really going to reject I?" Hee hee. With a chuckle, Chu Xiu turned around and left. Yi Bushuan could only follow behind him. Hua Xingzuan's expression was now completely dark. He snorted coldly and said, "Chu Xiu, if you leave today, you won't have another chance. In the entire breezy ocean, if I don't say anything, who would dare to help you?" Chu Xiu stopped in his tracks. Just when everyone thought that he was going to give in, Chu Xiu turned around and said faintly, "One must abide by the rules. If you can't do it, you can't accept the gift. Return my divine weapon's blueprint." A strange expression appeared on everyone's faces. If you can't do it, you want to take back the gift you've given. It seems like Chu Xiu is the one who doesn't care about rules. Chu Xiu. How dare you? Bailey Paubing snorted coldly. He had long disliked this Chu Xiu. At this moment, seeing that Chu Xiu had repeatedly rejected his foster father, Chu Xiu was definitely not one of them. Therefore, he took a step forward, and the armor on his body carried an extremely violent power. It was like a mountain crashing down on Chu Xiu. Bailey Paubing was known as the East Sea's #1 general. His physique was the best in the entire East Sea. Even if he was empty-handed, he could still take on divine weapons. After Qiu Tianya left, he was Hu Xingzuan's #1 expert. Chu Xiu punched with an expressionless face. The true fire of inner force suddenly bloomed, and dyed his body into a bright gold and silver color. With the majestic fist intent of the mountain and sea fist scripture, Chu Xiu's fist smashed down and collided with Bailey Paubing's fist. With the two of them as the center, a strong wave suddenly exploded, and the formation in the hall was instantly activated. The moment the two fists collided, Bailey Paubing's expression suddenly changed. A powerful force that made people tremble came. Even though he had used all the strength in his body, he still couldn't resist it. The armor on his body cracked under Chu Xiu's punch, and he couldn't help but step back. With every step back, a big pit appeared under his feet. The whole hall was like an earth dragon turning over. After retreating 9 steps, 100 broken soldiers finally managed to neutralize that force. However, the armor on his entire right arm had already been completely shattered. Everyone present looked at Chu Xiu in shock. None of these overseas martial artists had seen Chu Xiu fight. Even if some of them knew about Chu Xiu, information was still information, and it was a different concept from the person himself. At this time, seeing that Chu Xiu had forced back the #1 warrior of East Sea, Bailey Paubing, with one punch, and made him look so miserable, how could they not be shocked? Seeing that Bailey Paubing was at a disadvantage, Fu Longshao and Nalan Hai were ready to attack. However, at this time, Hu Xingzuan snorted coldly and said, "Give him the blueprint, and let him go." Today was his birthday, and he didn't want to see blood at such a time. Seeing that his godfather had spoken, Nalan Hai and the others had no choice but to stop and let Chu Xiu leave with the blueprint. Watching Chu Xiu's back as he left, Hu Xingzuan looked gloomy. Today was not a happy day for him. He had let Chu Xiu leave, not only because he didn't want to fight on his birthday, but also because he was a little afraid of Chu Xiu. He hadn't forgotten the sun-like radiance on Chu Xiu's body. In fact, if Hu Xingzuan had been more rational today, even if Chu Xiu had rejected Chu Xiu's request to be his godson, he wouldn't have needed to become sworn brothers with him. As long as he agreed to this matter, it would be good to make friends with him. After all, he could see that Chu Xiu would have limitless achievements in the future. However, it was a pity that people changed. If it had been more than 100 years ago, he would have done so. But now, even if he knew the cause and effect, he couldn't put down his pride and show goodwill to Chu Xiu after he had rejected him. This was because Hu Xingzuan wasn't the Hu Xingzuan from 100 years ago. Now, he was the supreme of the entire Breeze Sea, the 5th Lord Hua. Being a supreme for 100 years had already changed Hu Xingzuan's mentality. In the past, he was willing to show goodwill to those young elites with limitless futures. Even if he didn't accept them as his godson, he would still show goodwill to them. But now, he felt that Chu Xiu had disrespected him. This was something he couldn't tolerate. Of course, there was another point that Hu Xingzuan himself might not have noticed. He had relied on his own abilities to unearth so many young elites. But in reality, this kind of investment required time. He had to wait for them to grow. Hu Xingzuan was already 380 years old. How many more years could he live? Even if Chu Xiu could reach the heaven and earth mystic realm in the future, he probably wouldn't live to see that day. Since that was the case, why would he want to form good karma with him? As for now, with Bailey Paubing and the others around, he could stay as the supreme of the Breeze Sea until he died. At this moment, Fu Longshao walked over with a wine glass and said, "Godfather, don't be angry. Chu Xiu doesn't know what's good for him. Why do you have to stoop to his level? Without your help, he would have made a wasted trip to the Breeze Sea. Don't bother about him. The birthday banquet will continue." Hu Xingzuan snorted coldly and said, "This young man doesn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. He has made a name for himself in the martial world of the Central Plains. Does he really think that everyone in the Eastern Sea will give him face? Everyone else present also complimented Huixingzuan and asked him to calm down. After cleaning up, the hall was instantly filled with singing and dancing. Outside the Supreme Island, Bushuan smiled bitterly and said, "Official Chu, you were too rash just now. You offended Huixingzuan. We can leave the East Sea directly. If he doesn't say anything, no force in the entire Breeze Sea will help you. Isn't it just acknowledging him as your godfather? That old man's age is there for all to see. You won't lose out if you compromise. If you're not willing, just treat it as using him. After defeating Eastern Qi, don't bother with him anymore. That's all." Bushuan really didn't understand why Chu Xiu was so stubborn. He could tell that Huixingzuan really wanted to adopt Chu Xiu as his son. If he agreed, Chu Xiu's future would be incomparably smooth. Who would have thought that he would reject it? Chu Xiu said plainly, "Master Yi, there are some things that I don't think you do. You've also said that acknowledging him as your adoptive father is a compromise. But with my current status, why would I need to compromise? Moreover, Huixingzuan, is he worthy of being my godfather? Is he worthy? What a joke." Bushuan thought about it carefully and realized that it was true. Chu Xiu had always been stubborn. Moreover, he was like a master and a father to Wei Shiya. Wei Shiya had even handed over all the connections he had accumulated in the Yinma clan to Chu Xiu. It was as if he was treating Chu Xiu as his successor. But even so, Wei Shiya didn't ask Chu Xiu to acknowledge him as his godfather. Judging from Huixingzuan's appearance, apart from his better eyesight, he really couldn't be compared to Wei Shiya. But when he thought about his eyesight, Bushuan sighed, "But this old man's eyesight is really extraordinary. Ever since he adopted Zhao Yuanfeng as his son, he hasn't adopted a son for decades. This time, he thinks highly of you, Official Chu. It also proves that Official Chu, you will definitely be extraordinary in the future." Chu Xiu raised his eyebrows and said, "Does he need to see this kind of thing? It's not that I'm boasting, but even a blind person can see this kind of thing." Bushuan patted his head. He had forgotten about this. Based on Chu Xiu's current age and achievements, even an idiot would know that his future was limitless. In the past, Huixingzuan adopted Chu Xiu as his son. Now that he adopted Chu Xiu as his son, he simply wanted to pick up a ready-made one. The meaning was different. It was simply taking advantage of others when they were in a difficult situation. No wonder Chu Xiu became hostile on the spot. Chapter 10-12. The human heart was the hardest thing to control. If today's scene had happened when Chu Xiu and Chu Xiu were still weak and struggling to survive, perhaps it would have been another story that verified Huixingzuan's divine eyes. Unfortunately, Huixingzuan only remembered Chu Xiu's age and neglected Chu Xiu's identity and strength, which led to a complete fallout between them. Fortunately, he had been cautious all these years and did not fall out on the spot. Otherwise, it might have turned into a murder case. Anyway, it was not the first time that Chu Xiu had killed someone at a birthday banquet, so he was used to it. Just as Chu Xiu was about to leave, a voice suddenly rang out, "Official Chu, take care." Chu Xiu turned around and saw that it was Pak Donglai who had chased after him. Chu Xiu narrowed his eyes and said, "Mr. Bo, aren't you afraid of offending the fifth Lord Hua by following me?" Pak Donglai chuckled and said, "At this time, the fifth Lord Hua has a lot of people flattering him. Why would he pay attention to me? And if I was afraid of offending him in the past, I'm not afraid now." At this point, Pak Donglai's expression suddenly turned serious and said, "Official Chu, you want to borrow the power of the East Sea to attack Eastern Qi, but today you've fallen out with Huixingzuan. Don't underestimate his influence in the Breezy Sea. I'm afraid this time, you will really return in failure." Chu Xiu said lightly, "It doesn't matter. I'll just take it as coming to the East Sea to experience the local customs." Seeing that Chu Xiu was not in a hurry, Pak Donglai said in a deep voice, "Official Chu, I won't beat around the bush with you. I agree with what you said just now. Only when both sides benefit is it called cooperation. So this time, why don't we cooperate? Cooperate with what? With a dark look in his eyes, Pak Donglai said in a low voice, you help me kill Hu Xingzuan, and I will help you gather the Jianghu forces in the East Sea to attack Eastern Qi. When he said this, Chu Xiu's expression didn't change, but Yi Bushuan was shocked. Pak Donglai could be considered as a top figure in the breezy ocean. You could say that he was generous and straightforward, or that he was scheming, but his influence could not be compared to Hu Xingzuan. Who would have thought that he would actually dare to have such thoughts about Hu Xingzuan, who had dominated the breezy ocean for 100 years? His guts were not small. Pak Donglai looked around and said, there are too many people here. Official Chu, my Tainishui Hall's ship is over there. Why don't we go in and talk? Chu Xiu paused for a few breaths, then nodded and said, sure. Hearing Chu Xiu's words, Pak Donglai heaved a sigh of relief. As long as Chu Xiu did not leave immediately and continue to talk with him, it meant that there was a chance of success. When they arrived at Pak Donglai's ship, Chu Xiu said in a low voice, Mr. Bo, there is one thing that I am curious about. Why are you doing this? Pak Donglai grinned and said, everyone wants to climb up. Is there a reason for this? Someone is blocking my way, and he is not willing to give way. So I have to think of a way to solve this problem. Chuckling, Pak Donglai continued, all right, I will not keep you in suspense. Official Chu, I will tell you the truth. I have been wanting to make a move on Hu Xingzuan for a long time. Official Chu, you have not been in the East Sea for long. What you have heard about Hu Xingzuan is all sorts of mystical places. These things are indeed worth mentioning, but you definitely do not know about the rest. Hu Xingzuan's Paragon Island, or rather, his Hu family, has already become the scourge of the breezy sea. Oh? Hu Xingzuan wants to dominate the East Sea? Pak Donglai laughed coldly and said, perhaps he has the intention, but he is old and does not have the energy to do so. The disgusting thing about the Hu family is that they will not directly swallow you up and use force. Instead, they will send a direct descendant of the Hu family to your sect and interfere with your sect's affairs in the form of helping to earn benefits. In my Tainishui Hall, there are already a few places occupied by the Hu family. None of Hu Xingzuan's sons are successful, so he thought of such a disgusting method to find a long-term meal ticket for his descendants. But does he really think that everyone is willing to swallow their anger? Chu Xiu couldn't help but shake his head after hearing this. He did not even know how to describe Hu Xingzuan. Exploiting his subordinates was also very particular, just like what Chu Xiu did in the Northern Yan martial world. I'll take your things, but I'll also give you some practical benefits. I'll let you see what your monthly offerings are spent on. Although the Northern Yan martial world sects are also feeling the pinch, at least they know that the offerings they take out are effective, and the price is clearly marked. That's all. Hu Xingzuan is doing better than Chu Xiu. But in reality, it's like cutting flesh with a blunt knife, and you don't know how much he's going to cut. Hu Xingzuan's actions are simply making things difficult for his descendants. If he dies in the future, if his adopted sons do not choose to protect the Hu family's descendants, the entire Hu family will die a terrible death. Chu Xiu knocked on the table and said, if that's the case, then it's not easy for Hu Xingzuan to maintain the Supreme Island for so long. But I'm still curious. Why did you come to me? You must know that I'm from the Central Plains, and I just came to the East Sea. Is this an impromptu idea? Pak Donglai smiled awkwardly and said, it's indeed an impromptu idea. But if Official Chu is willing to help, the success rate will definitely increase greatly. Also, if Official Chu didn't fall out with Hu Xingzuan, I wouldn't have come to you. The fifth Lord Hu's Supreme Island has been established in the breezy ocean for over 100 years. It's so powerful that it's unimaginable. So, I don't even dare to look for someone to work with, because I don't know if they'll betray me. But I'm very confident in Official Chu, because you're an outsider, and you've just fallen out with Hu Xingzuan. With Official Chu's personality, you've basically given up on the possibility of working with Hu Xingzuan. So, here in the breezy ocean, working with Official Chu is the most reliable way. Chu Xiu squinted his eyes and looked at Pak Donglai. This person is indeed the first impression that Chu Xiu gave me. He's very scheming. According to Chu Xiu's guess, this person has wanted to make a move on Huixingzuan for a long time, but he forcefully endured it until now. In the hall just now, Chu Xiu subconsciously saw Pak Donglai. At that time, Pak Donglai presented a congratulatory gift to Huixingzuan respectfully. When he looked at Huixingzuan, his eyes were filled with admiration. No matter when Chu Xiu looked at him, his expression was the same. It's not difficult to act for a while, but it's difficult to continue acting like this. After a while, Chu Xiu smiled and said, I'm very impressed that you have the courage to challenge Huixingzuan in the breezy ocean. I like to work with smart people, and I think Mr. Bo is a smart person. To Chu Xiu, as long as he can get martial artists from the East Sea to attack Eastern Qi, it doesn't matter who the person is. If Huixingzuan doesn't know what's good for him, then I'll just get someone else. Pak Donglai's reputation in the breezy ocean is not small, and it's not bad either. It seems like he has been secretly accumulating his reputation for this day. As long as he can get rid of Huixingzuan's faction, Pak Donglai will be able to take over, and he can also help him consolidate the power of the breezy ocean to attack Eastern Qi. Seeing that Chu Xiu has agreed, Pak Donglai also let out a long sigh. He has been planning this for a long time, and the reason why he hasn't executed it yet is because he lacks strength. Huixingzuan has dominated the breezy ocean for so many years, and he himself isn't worth mentioning. However, the power that he indirectly controls is incomparably strong, and Pak Donglai has no way of shaking it. At this moment, Huixingzuan's power is at its weakest. Zhao Yuanfeng went to the Central Plains to participate in the Central Plains Warriors competition. Coincidentally, Chu Xiu has a falling out with Huixingzuan. Pak Donglai can use this opportunity to get strong support from Chu Xiu and Yibushuan. This is an extremely rare opportunity, so he doesn't care that his plan hasn't been completed yet, and wants to pull Chu Xiu to his side. At this moment, Chu Xiu said in a deep voice, Mr. Bo, since we've already teamed up, let's talk about the power that you have. I don't believe that Tianyishui Hall alone can destroy the Supreme Island. Pak Donglai smiled, Official Chu is right. If I only have Tianyishui Hall, I won't dare to attack the Supreme Island. I'm not that arrogant. Actually, there are many people in the East Sea who are dissatisfied with Huixingzuan's way of doing things. Many of them have already teamed up with me. For example, the leader of the Stormy Waves Alliance in the Breezy Ocean, Koshin Tong. He was born in the wilderness, and he formed the Stormy Waves Alliance with those small islands. Although his subordinates aren't the strongest, they have the most people. He has a huge grudge against Huixingzuan's godson, Bailey Paobing. He was once heavily injured by Bailey Paobing, and his divine weapon was destroyed by Bailey Paobing. Other than Koshin Tong, Tianyishui Hall has also recruited many experts among the wandering cultivators. Although they're scattered all over the breezy ocean, they'll appear here as soon as they receive my message. Oh right, there's another person that you should be familiar with, Official Chu. He's the leader of the Cetacean Society, Long Tianying. He's also on my side. The Cetacean Society is the largest merchant association between the breezy ocean and the Central Plains, and their trade volume is shocking. In the past, the Cetacean Society had the help of Saint Master Tam Yuan, so they could still get by. But ever since Master Tam Yuan passed away in the Central Plains, the Cetacean Society lost its backing and was suppressed. The Hua family teamed up with Zhao Yuanfeng and seized many of the Cetacean Society's trade routes. They forced the Cetacean Society to become a second-rate merchant association. If it wasn't for Master Tam Yuan's legacy, Long Tianying might even have lost his life. Many of the things in Tianyishui Hall came from the Cetacean Society. We've teamed up to overthrow the Supreme Island. Now that you're here, Official Chu, I believe Leader Long will be very happy to see Official Chu. Chapter 10-13. After Huixingzuan's birthday celebration ended, Chu Xiu followed Pak Donglai to the island where Tianyishui Hall was located and met the people that he had roped in. The leader of the Stormy Waves Alliance, Koshin Tong, was a straightforward man. He wasn't as scheming as Huixingzuan. He wanted to overthrow the Supreme Island purely because he couldn't stand the grudges of the past. Similarly, Chu Xiu also met Long Tianying of the Cetacean Society here. Long Tianying was so touched when he saw Chu Xiu that he almost teared up. Of course, Long Tianying had only met Chu Xiu once, and they weren't close. He wasn't moved to tears because he saw Chu Xiu, but because he thought of Master Tam Yuan. Master Tam Yuan had given Long Tianying and the entire Cetacean Society a new lease on life. In the end, Master Tam Yuan passed away, and the Hua family simply slaughtered him like a pig or a sheep. Although Long Tianying had some power under him, he wasn't even a warrior compared to Pak Donglai's Tainishui Hall. He was just a businessman, and he didn't even dare to resist. Long Tianying was reminded of Master Tam Yuan again when he saw Chu Xiu. He said with a sobbing tone, "I didn't expect to see official Chu again today. If I had known, I wouldn't have returned to the East Sea. I would have stayed and guarded Master Tam Yuan's tomb for the rest of my life. It's better than living in fear overseas." Of course, Long Tianying was just joking. He had worked hard overseas for his entire life to build a top merchant association like the Cetacean Society. How could he give up so easily? Chu Xiu patted his shoulder and said, "President Long, you don't have to be so sad. I'm here today, and the Hua family's tyrannical days are coming to an end. By then, the Cetacean Society will still be the biggest merchant association overseas." Chu Xiu didn't mind helping Long Tianying. Of course, Master Tam Yuan was also one of the reasons. Chu Xiu rarely owed anyone anything ever since he stepped into the martial world. And there were only a few elders who truly helped him. Old Man Wei was one of them. Master Tam Yuan was also one of them. Master Tam Yuan had given all his inheritance to Chu Xiu. Although Chu Xiu had cheated him out of it, he still owed Master Tam Yuan a big favor. Chu Xiu didn't like monks, but Master Tam Yuan was a true holy monk, the kind that people truly admired. Unfortunately, good people didn't live long in this world. Chu Kuanga was a good person, a hero, and a great warrior, but he died in the prime of his life. Master Tam Yuan was a good person, a holy monk, but he died just as he stepped into the true fire spirit refinement realm. On the other hand, Hua Xingzuan allowed his useless descendants to dominate the East Sea. Although they didn't do anything evil, they weren't good people either. In the end, he lived longer than anyone else. Chu Xiu didn't want to die so early, so it was better to leave the job of being a hero to someone else. In the secret room, Pak Donglai said, "With the addition of official Chu, the chances of us destroying Supreme Island will increase greatly. We should also plan how we should do it." Yi Bushuan said in disdain, "What's the point of planning? Official Chu and I will help you take care of Hua Xingzuan's 3 adopted sons. You have 2 true fire spirit refinement realm martial artists left. Do you think you can't take care of a dying old man like Hua Xingzuan? As for the others, Tainishui Hall and the Stormy Waves Alliance have so many people. Can't you deal with them?" Pak Donglai smiled bitterly, "Master Yi, you're not from the East Sea, so you don't know how strong Supreme Island's foundation is after dominating the East Sea for over 100 years. Let's talk about Supreme Island first. Did you notice anything strange when you went there?" But in reality, it's said that the entire Supreme Island is a huge machine forged by an ancient blacksmith master. It has endless power. No one knows if this is true or not, but I've sent people to check the history of Supreme Island. Before Hua Xingzuan appeared, there were indeed no islands in the sea. So, there's definitely something wrong with Supreme Island. There's also Hua Xingzuan's eldest adopted son, Qiu Tianya. Some people even said that he had reached the heaven and earth elemental state. Although he's gone missing, according to the information I've gathered, Qiu Tianya gave Hua Xingzuan something before he left. It might be a trump card, something that can at least protect Supreme Island. And don't forget the name of Hua Xingzuan, God's Eye. Everyone knows that Hua Xingzuan has 5 adopted sons. Why don't you know that he doesn't have a 6th? I got this information from a drunk Hua family disciple. He said that Hua Xingzuan seems to have another adopted son, but he rarely appears in front of everyone. He only guards in the dark. Even if Wuxia has been pampered for so many years, he also has the cultivation of true fire god refinement state. Does he need a real pellet state martial artist to guard him? So, it's obvious how strong the person guarding him is. Wuxia frowned slightly and said, then what's your previous plan? Pak Donglai waved his hand and said, sow discord. Among the 3 adopted sons of Wuxia, Nalan Hai is closer to Bailey Paubing, but the most powerful one is Fu Longxiao. Fu Longxiao's blue dragon fleet travels between the Windbreaker Sea and the Windbreaker Sea. He has a strong background and can bring a lot of benefits to Wuxia, so he is also the most favored by Wuxia. But because of this, his attitude towards Bailey Paubing and Nalan Hai is also quite arrogant, which made the two very unhappy. So, my plan is to send someone to infiltrate the Blue Dragon fleet and become Fu Longxiao's confidant, then find an opportunity to sow discord between them. When they turn hostile, I'll kill them in one fell swoop. After that, Pak Donglai looked at Chu Xiu and said, what does official Chu think of this plan? Chu Xiu nodded and said, not bad. Sometimes, the biggest weakness of a person is not their appearance, but their heart. But I don't have time to waste here. If I delay any longer, I'm afraid that the Northern Yan fleet will be destroyed by Eastern Qi. Pak Donglai smiled and said, I almost forgot, official Chu is very experienced in this kind of thing. I wonder if official Chu has any good ideas? Towards Chu Xiu's attitude, Pak Donglai wasn't angry. He wasn't at the level of Wuxia, who was used to being in a high position and couldn't tolerate being refuted. Moreover, he had a detailed understanding of Chu Xiu's information. In the Central Plains, Chu Xiu had destroyed countless families and clans. He was indeed very experienced in this kind of thing. Chu Xiu knocked on the table and said, this seems very simple to me. Nalan Hai and the others live in different places. We just need to go to them one by one, kill them one by one, and then attack Supreme Island. Pak Donglai was dumbfounded and said, that's it? Chu Xiu nodded and said, that's it. But what if we make any movements and arouse the suspicion of others? What should we do then? Chu Xiu asked, your Tainishui Hall is so big. You should have a formation master. You should be able to set up a formation that can temporarily seal off the aura of a small island, right? Pak Donglai was stunned and said, yes, but, Chu Xiu waved his hand and said, no buts. I'll do it for you. What you need to do is to set up the formation around us while I'm killing people. Just don't let the waves spread out. It doesn't have to take too long, 15 minutes will be enough. Oh yes, I'll pretend to leave the Qingfeng Ocean with Master Yi tomorrow. You can come and pick us up after we sail to an uninhabited sea area. Actually, in Chu Xiu's opinion, it was too easy to kill people silently in the East Seas terrain. Everyone lived on different islands, and they were easily hundreds or even thousands of miles apart. It would take half a day to travel back and forth by boat. This was simply a natural barrier. After hearing Chu Xiu's plan, Pak Donglai was still a little hesitant, but he still nodded and agreed. He had not seen Chu Xiu's real means, but he still chose to believe the description of Chu Xiu in the information. Chu Xiu was able to rise up in the Central Plains, a place that was countless times crueler than overseas, so he was definitely not an impulsive and brainless person. The next day, Chu Xiu directly boarded a ship with Yi Bushuan to return to the South Sea. This scene was seen by many people. If Chu Xiu was said to not be famous in the Qingfeng Ocean before, then after he rejected Wuxingzuan's request to be adopted as his son, almost everyone in the Qingfeng Ocean recognized Chu Xiu. After all, in so many years, Chu Xiu was the first person to reject Wuxingzuan's offer. Moreover, most people felt that Chu Xiu did not know how to appreciate favors. Although Chu Xiu was in the true fire spirit refinement realm and was an important figure in the Central Plains warriors, which one of the people who were adopted by the fifth Lord Hua was not in the true fire spirit refinement realm? Which one of them was not an important figure? However, they neglected the fact that when these people were adopted by Wuxingzuan, they did not have the strength and status that Chu Xiu had now. At this time, on Haotian Island, Wuxingzuan was slowly sipping a cup of specially made spiritual tea. This spiritual tea was filled with vitality. If the ingredients were used to refine pills, it could be used to refine 8th grade pills. However, he was drinking it like tea here. Has Chu Xiu left the Qingfeng Ocean? Hu Xingzuan asked. One of his direct descendants was serving by his side. When he heard that, he hurriedly said, "That unappreciative fellow has already left. The old ancestor has taken him in as his adopted son and given him so much face. Yet, he still doesn't know how to appreciate favors. What a joke. Without the old ancestor's permission, who in the entire Qingfeng Ocean would dare to help him? If he doesn't scram back to the Central Plains with his tail between his legs, staying here is just a waste of time." Hu Xingzuan narrowed his eyes and said calmly, "Everyone has their own aspirations. If he is not willing, we can't force him, right?" Although Hu Xingzuan said that, he was still a little unhappy with Chu Xiu's rejection. All these years, no one had ever rejected him like this. Rejected his good intentions. However, Hu Xingzuan was not too angry. How many more years could he live? Since Chu Xiu had rejected him, then his future achievements had nothing to do with him. However, at this time, in the uninhabited waters of the Qingfeng Ocean, Chu Xiu was already sitting on Tai Nishui Hall's ship. He stood at the bow of the ship and muttered, "It's time to kill." Chapter 10:14. Chu Xiu's first target was the nameless island where Nalanhai was. Although Chu Xiu said that he only needed to kill people on the island, Pak Donglai still gave Chu Xiu a lot of information about Nalanhai to be on the safe side. Although Chu Xiu thought that he didn't need to prepare so much to kill a cripple, he still looked through the information out of curiosity. After looking through it, Chu Xiu only had one comment about Nalanhai. His heart was higher than the sky, but his life was thinner than paper. This person was considered relatively young among Hu Xingzuan's godson. Moreover, when he was adopted by Hu Xingzuan, he was only a child. Therefore, his actual age was even younger than Zhao Yuanfeng. At such a young age, he was adopted by Hu Xingzuan. In addition, his talent was also exceptionally good. Therefore, this had led to his arrogant and condescending personality. Apart from Hu Xingzuan's eldest adopted son, Qiu Tianya, and Bailey Paubing, who often took care of him when he was young, he did not put anyone in his eyes. Even if it was Hu Xingzuan's son who offended him, he would still beat him up without hesitation. This caused him to have a conflict with Kang Dongming in the future. Although he knew that he wasn't a match for Kang Dongming, he still pestered him. In the end, Kang Dongming killed him and crippled his legs. From then on, Na Lanhai's character became gloomy, violent, and incomparably eccentric. There used to be some servants on his nameless island. However, the number of servants dwindled, and they all ran away after being scolded and beaten by him. 2 days ago, when he returned from Supreme Island, the last few servants also ran away after being scolded by him. The reason why he was angry was none other than Chu Xiu. He was jealous of Chu Xiu. Back then, he was just like Chu Xiu. At such a young age, he already had the strength of true fire spirit refinement state, and could stand shoulder to shoulder with the older generation. Moreover, he had Hu Xingzuan as his godfather. Who in the entire breezy ocean dared to challenge him? However, ever since he was crippled by Kang Dongming, he felt that everything had changed. His godfather no longer valued him, and Fu Longshao even looked at him with disdain. And that Zhao Yuanfeng. The guy who came later even dared to hire Kang Dongming as a guest, which was simply not putting him in his eyes. Back then, he had even brought this matter to Hu Xingzuan, but all he got in return was a sentence from his godfather saying that they should be brothers. Nalanhai had lost his composure when a person who was extremely arrogant ended up like this. Especially at a time like this, when he saw Chu Xiu, who was just as young and equally powerful, it made him feel even more upset. If his legs were not crippled, he would be the East Sea's Chu Xiu. That was why he had targeted Chu Xiu during the birthday celebration. Other than suspicion, there was also jealousy in it. At this moment, soft footsteps were heard from outside. Nalanhai roared, get lost. All of you, get out. I'll break all your legs if you don't get lost. You were the one who lost your legs, and now you're trying to break others' legs, forcing your pain onto others. Do you think that makes you feel better? Hearing this voice, Nalan Hai's expression immediately changed. His body moved, and he hovered in midair. His gaze towards Chu Xiu was filled with shock. He had clearly left, so why was he still here? At this time, Nalan Hai also noticed the movement around him. Something was wrong. There was not a single movement around the entire island, and even the sound of the waves had been muffled. Nalan Hai's legs were indeed crippled, but he had experienced countless battles in his early years. At this moment, he understood what Chu Xiu was going to do. Chu Xiu! How dare you! Chu Xiu only sneered. The next moment, Buddha's light shone around him, and the Dharma form of the Mahavarokana seal appeared behind him. The Buddha's seal fell, and its power was like a landslide. Nalan Hai's legs were only crippled, which affected part of his combat power. However, his cultivation was still there. At this moment, Nalan Hai formed a seal with his hand, and the endless water vapor around him condensed into a monstrous wave in front of him. It was like a tsunami crashing against the Buddha's seal. But the next moment, the powerful and heavy Buddha's seal completely shattered it. Nalan Hai's figure was blasted into the ground, and the powerful force shook his meridians, causing his face to turn pale. Chu Xiu stepped out, and the Dharma form of the Mahavarokana seal behind him was majestic and sacred, but the Buddha's seal in his hand fell mercilessly again. Nalan Hai roared angrily, and countless blood mists burst out from the pores of his body, fusing with the water vapor, and turned into countless blood spears that blasted towards Chu Xiu. However, they were still forcibly smashed by the seal. Nalan Hai spat out a mouthful of blood, and his face was as pale as paper. His eyes were full of horror and disbelief. Being overseas, Nalan Hai's knowledge was actually not as good as that of the warriors in the Central Plains. After all, the number of strong warriors overseas was limited, and the area was also limited. Therefore, the strongest person Nalan Hai had ever seen in his life was Kang Dongming, who had crippled his legs. And now, he finally saw another person, a person like Kang Dongming, who he did not even have the confidence to resist. The Buddha's seal fell for the third time, and this time, Chu Xiu formed the colorless sealing palm seal. The power of this seal distorted the universe, and strangled everything. Nalan Hai could not withstand this seal, and was immediately sent flying while vomiting blood. At this moment, a halberd appeared in Chu Xiu's hand, and he displayed the great E-halberd technique. The halberd seemed to be able to shatter mountains and split rivers, and that overbearing power had instantly torn apart Nalan Hai's protective Jin Qi, penetrated his chest, and directly nailed him to the ground. This halberd was not a divine weapon. The Heavenly Way war case was severely damaged, and could no longer change its form. However, even an ordinary precious weapon could still kill people, and even without a weapon. Chu Xiu only used a weapon to confuse people. This halberd had completely torn apart Nalan Hai's heart. Chu Xiu slowly walked in front of Nalan Hai, and expressionlessly pulled out the halberd. In an instant, Nalan Hai's life force fell to the extreme. Before he died, Nalan Hai pointed at Chu Xiu, but before he could say his last words, his life force completely dissipated. He still had a lot of questions, such as why did Chu Xiu return after leaving, and why did he come to kill him again? Unfortunately, he was destined to never get the answers to these questions. Chu Xiu was also not interested in explaining so much to a dead person. Looking at Nalan Hai's corpse, Chu Xiu turned around and left. At this moment, outside of Nalan Hai's nameless island, a small boat was parked there. However, from the outside, they could not see the boat. Countless formations were carved on the boat, and there were even a few formation masters setting up formations below the cabin, hiding the movements on the island from the outside world. On the small boat, Pak Donglai seemed rather nervous. He had been planning to attack Supreme Island for 8 to 10 years, and not just a day or two. Now that the plan had finally started, the steps were completely different from what he had imagined. It was no wonder that he was nervous. However, Pak Donglai suppressed his anxiety and took out a chessboard. He said to Yi Bushuan, Master Yi, there's no point in just waiting. Why don't we play a game? Yi Bushuan shook his head and said, no thanks. There's not enough time. Pak Donglai was taken aback. Don't worry, Master Yi. My chess skills are not that bad. I'm not saying that the game will end too quickly. I'm just saying that official Chu will probably be done by the time we started. It can't be that fast, right? Pak Donglai was still in disbelief. Previously, he wanted to go in with Chu Xiu to attack Nalan Hai. However, Chu Xiu said that there was no need for that. The more people there were, the easier it would be to leave traces. Pak Donglai definitely believed that Chu Xiu could win. However, he couldn't believe that Chu Xiu could kill Nalan Hai so quickly. Even if Nalan Hai's legs were crippled, he was still a true spiritual refinement state cultivator. Just as he was still in doubt, Chu Xiu had already landed on the boat. Pak Donglai was shocked. Yi Bushuan shrugged and said, I told you that there's definitely not enough time. Official Chu has already taken care of that side? Pak Donglai was still in shock. Chu Xiu said faintly, he's a cripple. If I'm any slower, then I'll be a real cripple. Alright, he's already dead. Go back and wait for news. When Bailey Pobbing is lured out, then we'll take care of him. Chu Xiu's idea was not to swarm in and kill randomly. Instead, he wanted to kill them one by one. Nalan Hai was the easiest to kill because there was no one else on the entire island except for him. And Bailey Pobbing still had Divine Weapon Island. Although there weren't many people on Divine Weapon Island, there were still many elites who belonged to Bailey Pobbing. If one of them escaped, it would be easy for someone to leak the news. Therefore, Chu Xiu killed Nalan Hai first. Then, he would find a way to lure out Bailey Pobbing and finally take care of him. Pak Donglai rubbed his chin, but he still couldn't hide the shock in his heart. After all, Nalan Hai was one of the top experts in the overseas region. In the end, he was squashed to death by Chu Xiu like a chicken. This was already terrifying enough. Of course, the most terrifying thing was that even though Chu Xiu had such power, he was forced by the righteous path of the Central Plains warriors to come to the overseas region to seek reinforcements. One could imagine how deep the waters of the Central Plains were. The boat quietly sailed away. 2 days later, Nalan Hai's corpse was discovered. After all, Nalan Hai was Hua Xingzuan's adopted son. Hearing that he was angry again and chased away the servants, Hua Xingzuan could only send a few disciples of the Hua family to take a look. In the end, they actually brought back Nalan Hai's corpse. When the news of Nalan Hai's death spread, the entire Hua Xingzuan's forces were in an uproar. Everyone hurried over to see what was going on. For so many years, no one had ever dared to provoke the Supreme Island. When Hua Xingzuan saw Nalan Hai's corpse, his first reaction wasn't sadness, but panic. Chapter 10-15. Hua Xingzuan was indeed panicking, because the peace he had maintained for so long had been shattered. Ever since he took in these godson, or to be more precise, ever since he obtained the pair of God's eyes, everything had been smooth sailing for him. For so many years, he had never suffered a loss. He relied on these foster sons to support his current situation of dominating the Clear Wind Sea region. Hua Xingzuan panicked in the face of such a sudden situation. His usual calm and unperturbed appearance was gone. He even kept pacing around Nalan Hai's corpse, his mouth constantly muttering, "Who the hell is it? Who dared to kill the fourth prince?" Even Bailey Pobbing frowned when he saw Hua Xingzuan's reaction. He coughed and said, "Don't panic, Godfather. We don't have to be afraid of anyone, as long as it's not a heaven and earth abstruse realm powerhouse." Bailey Pobbing felt a little sad, because he had always had a good relationship with Nalan Hai. Among Hua Xingzuan's godson, he immediately took in Fu Longshao and Nalan Hai as his godson after taking in Bailey Pobbing. When Nalan Hai was young, Bailey Pobbing even gave him pointers on martial arts for a period of time. The two were like teachers and friends. Thus, after Na Lanhai was unable to recover from his setback, he was always gloomy towards him. However, Na Lanhai's attitude towards Bailey Paubing did not change at all. Hu Xingzuan patted Bailey Paubing and said, "I'll leave this place to you then. I know that you have a good relationship with the fourth prince. You have to find the murderer as soon as possible and avenge the fourth prince." Bailey Paubing nodded and began to examine Na Lanhai's corpse. He was not Hu Xingzuan, who lived a comfortable life. Instead, he had climbed all the way here, so he was very familiar with these things. Fu Longshao also came to help. Although he didn't have a good relationship with Na Lanhai and Bailey Paubing, he couldn't care less about scheming at this time. He followed Bailey Paubing to examine Na Lanhai's body. After a long while, Bailey Paubing said with a solemn expression, "The person who attacked is very strong. He practically crushed everything in his path. The fourth prince even started to burn his blood essence, but he still couldn't stop him." Fu Longshao also said, looking at the wound, "The fourth prince should have died under a weapon like halberd. Combined with the opponent's strength, the person who attacked should be at the peak of the true fire spirit refinement realm." Bailey Paubing frowned and said, "But I didn't detect any kind of vital energy from the fourth prince's body. In the Qingfeng Sea region, who would use halberd as a weapon?" Fu Longshao shook his head and said, "Among the contemporary martial artists, there are some martial artists from the Central Plains who use halberd as a weapon. Especially the generals from the Central Plains who come from the military. A weapon like halberd is definitely a fierce weapon in battle. But in our overseas region, there are still many people who use sabers and swords. Even if there are martial artists who use halberd as a weapon, their strength is definitely not at the true fire spirit refinement realm." Bailey Paubing suddenly said, "What about the Feng-splitting sea?" Fu Longshao thought for a moment and said, "There is an expert living in seclusion in the depths of the Feng-splitting sea who uses halberd. But the opponent cultivates black flame gang energy. This kind of gang energy is hot and overbearing. Once he attacks, it is easy to leave traces. But there is no trace of gang energy left on the fourth prince's body. Most importantly, why did he kill the fourth prince? What's the motive?" Bailey Paubing rubbed his head, feeling a headache coming on. He was also puzzled about the motive. He couldn't figure out why someone would want to kill a guy like Na Lanhai, who was already crippled. As for whether Na Lanhai had offended people over the years, there were really many. But he was already living in seclusion on a small island, and the people he really offended were not the big shots with power and influence. They were just some servants who served him. It couldn't be those people who did it, right? At this moment, Hu Xingzuan, who had been watching silently from the side, suddenly said, "Do you guys think it could be Chu Xiao who did it?" Fu Longshao and Bailey Paubing looked at each other at the same time and shook their heads. Bailey Paubing said, "It shouldn't be possible. I've looked into it before. Chu Xiao has long left the Eastern Sea. And according to Chu Xiao's information, this person is skilled in saber techniques. There is even a record of him forcing the abbot of the Great Light Temple, the Heaven and Earth Elemental Enlightenment Realm expert, Su Ci, to retreat with a single saber strike. Although Chu Xiao had used the Black Tortoise True technique outside, he had only used it a few times. It was impossible for the overseas region to have such detailed information. Even in the wind-sweeping tower, one had to look through the most detailed information in order to be mentioned." Fu Longshao also said, "That's right. It doesn't seem like Chu Xiao's doing, because he has no reason to do so. Chu Xiao came to the Eastern Sea to look for reinforcements. So what if he killed the fourth prince? Does he think we'll help him just because one of us died? If it's to vent his anger." Speaking up to this point, Fu Longshao secretly glanced at Hu Xingzuan and said, "If it's to vent his anger, he doesn't have to kill the fourth prince. Godfather, many of your direct descendants are in the outside world." Hearing this, some of the direct descendants of the Hua family felt a chill in their hearts. Previously, they were bold enough to do whatever they wanted in the outside world because they were confident that the Hua family and sovereign island could protect them. But now that they saw a dead person, they realized that not everyone was afraid of their backing. They even wanted to go out and call their children back. It was too dangerous outside. Sovereign Island was safer. The two searched for a while, but they couldn't find anything. They had no choice but to seal Nalan Hai's body. Bailey Paubing said solemnly, "Godfather, during this period of time, recall the Hua family's people. We don't know if the fourth prince died because he offended someone, or if someone is targeting Sovereign Island." He turned to Fu Longshao and said, "Third brother, don't think about running to the wind-splitting ocean for now. Mobilize your Blue Dragon fleet to look for clues." Fu Longshao humphed, "Do I need you to tell me that?" After giving the orders, Bailey Paubing and Fu Longshao both left. They were going to gather people and look for clues. He didn't believe that no one in that area of the sea had heard the slightest bit of movement when he had killed someone so brazenly. Hua Xingzuan watched the two leave. He wanted to say something, but he couldn't say a single word. He didn't know why, but he always had a feeling of unease. Of course, he wasn't the only one who felt it. Bailey Paubing felt it too. He seemed to have vaguely sensed something, but he couldn't figure out what it was. Driving his ship, Bailey Paubing returned to Divine Armament Island. Although Bailey Paubing wasn't good at managing his own forces, he had quite a number of subordinates. Sending them out would be of some use. At that moment, a huge wave suddenly rose on the surface of the ocean. The wave was extremely terrifying. Like a tsunami, it completely capsized Bailey Paubing's ship in an instant. Bailey Paubing fell into the water, but the stellar chi around him had already separated the endless seawater. At that moment, Bailey Paubing suddenly realized something was wrong. His ship was refined using a blacksmithing technique. 80% of the ship was made of metal, and it was also inscribed with countless arrays. It wouldn't be a problem for it to sail through the Windbreaker Sea. Most of the sea in the Windbreaker Sea was calm. How could there be such a huge wave that even capsized his ship? Bailey Paubing walked on the water and his figure rose to the surface. At that moment, his expression suddenly changed. The area within a radius of more than 10 miles had been completely separated by countless water walls. It was like a prison. Even an idiot could guess that he had fallen into an ambush. At that moment, a crack appeared on the water wall. Chu Xiu walked out of it and walked on the water. Bailey Paubing instantly understood everything the moment he saw Chu Xiu. But he didn't expect this person to be Chu Xiu. Chu Xiu. It's you? Why did you kill the fourth prince? Why did you become enemies with the Venerable Island? Just because we didn't agree to work with you? Just because Godfather wanted to take you in as his godson? Bailey Paubing understood, but he was confused because it didn't make sense. Chu Xiu couldn't possibly be so narrow-minded that he would kill someone over such a small conflict, right? You really want to know? Bailey Paubing nodded with a gloomy expression. Go to hell and think about it with your fourth brother. As Chu Xiu's voice fell, in the next moment, the scorching true fire of inner energy around him burned, and there was even a black world annihilation fire mixed within it. As the punch landed, a thunderous explosion rang out in the surroundings. The punch suppressed the heavens and earth, and crushed the mountains and rivers. Bailey Paubing roared angrily. Dazzling white astral energy wrapped around his body like a sharp blade. He didn't have a weapon, but his entire body was filled with weapons. The two fists collided. In that instant, a powerful shockwave rippled outwards. With the two of them as the center, an endless whirlpool of waves exploded. The water droplets at the center were even torn into tiny mist. Bailey Paubing's expression changed. Just like that day at Hua Xingzuan's birthday banquet, he couldn't withstand the power of Chu Xiu's punch. He retreated. The armor on his arm was torn, and Bailey Paubing's face was pale. However, Chu Xiu was expressionless as he smashed his fist down again. This time, it was an extreme strength. One punch after another, Bailey Paubing's armor, which was comparable to a divine weapon, was completely shattered. He was even vomiting blood from Chu Xiu's punches. With a furious roar, the chi and blood around Bailey Paubing roared. He controlled the power of heaven and earth around him. As he punched, the endless waves turned into a blood-colored dragon that roared at Chu Xiu. Facing this punch, Chu Xiu still punched with a simple punch. That punch was the only one in the world. Chapter 10:16. Using real fire to refine one's body, one would be able to stand shoulder to shoulder with the world without relying on the world itself. Chu Xiu's punch was the fist intent that Qinqing Di had once comprehended. It should be said that every warrior who had practiced real fire to refine their body should be able to comprehend the fist intent. However, Chu Xiu was the kind of person who had mastered it in a short period of time. Therefore, this punch, which did not rely on the world and completely exerted his own strength to the extreme, was only comprehended by Chu Xiu now. Among those of the same level, when it came to physical cultivation, Chu Xiu was invincible except for Qinqing Di. The blood-colored water dragon was smashed, and the boundless blood qi was completely smashed by the power of this punch, turning into a blood mist that drifted around. Bailey Paubing had a complicated expression on his face. From the moment Chu Xiu blasted out this punch, he knew that he had lost. The power of this punch was not something he could resist. It could even be said that the power of this punch was the ultimate power that he had always pursued. However, fate made a fool out of him. He had never imagined that he would die under such a punch. When Chu Xiu's punch fell, Bailey Paubing instantly felt a strong force pouring into his body. In an instant, his eyes were covered by a blood-red color, and in the blink of an eye, he was no longer breathing. Chu Xiu's punch had shattered all the defenses of his body, and even his bones had been smashed. At this time, under the sea, Bailey Paubing's boat had floated up, but all the people on the boat had been buried at the bottom of the sea. Because of the formation, the wind and waves under the sea were not ordinary. Apart from Bailey Paubing, who had cultivated real fire to the spiritual refinement realm, no one could walk on the water in such an environment. Casually throwing Bailey Paubing's body onto the deck, Chu Xiu walked out of the water curtain magic array. Pak Donglai's boat was already waiting for him there. Seeing that Chu Xiu had dealt with Bailey Paubing so quickly this time, Pak Donglai was also surprised. However, with the incident with Nailan Hai as a foundation, he was able to withstand it. Official Chu, are you looking for an opportunity to get rid of Fu Longxiao? Chu Xiu nodded and said, it would be best if we can get rid of Fu Longxiao. However, 2 people had died in a row. Even if Fu Longxiao was an idiot, he would be able to guess that we were coming for him. He probably didn't have a chance. But it doesn't matter. With our current strength, it won't be a problem for us to attack Sovereign Island. Pak Donglai nodded. He was really convinced now. After getting rid of 2 of Huixingzuan's foster sons in one go, their plan was almost in the bag this time. On the second day, Bailey Paubing's boat and corpse were found. The sea they stopped at wasn't considered remote, and there were many boats coming and going. Bailey Paubing's steel boat was very famous in the breezy ocean. Everyone was a little confused when they saw his boat parked there motionlessly. But when they saw Bailey Paubing's corpse, they were in an uproar. The entire breezy ocean was instantly in an uproar. When Nailan Hai died, most people didn't know about it. After all, Nailan Hai's corpse was found by the Hua family. But this time, Bailey Paubing's corpse was found by others. Someone even spread the news that Nailan Hai was dead too. Now, the entire breezy ocean was in a state of panic. Someone seemed to have realized that this was targeting the 5th Lord Hua. The entire breezy ocean was showing signs of changing. Currently, on Sovereign Island, Huixingzuan and Fu Longxiao looked at Bailey Paubing's corpse on the ground and felt chills down their spines. Yesterday, Bailey Paubing was still inspecting Nailan Hai's corpse with them. But today, he was already a corpse. Who could take such a blow? What's going on? What's going on? Huixingzuan was about to go crazy. His life had been too smooth sailing. Ever since he obtained the pair of god eyes, all he had to do was to place his bets and follow his superiors who had a promising future. When he had a certain level of influence, he started to nurture his foster sons, such as Qiu Tianya. All the fights and battles were handled by his foster sons, and he was only responsible for reaping the fruits of their labor. As a senior who was almost 400 years old, the setbacks and hardships he had experienced couldn't even be compared to a lone cultivator who had been in the pugilistic world for a few years. Having a smooth sailing life wasn't a good thing. It was better to suffer early. If he didn't experience any setbacks and hardships when he was young, he would be scared to death by the pressure when he was old. Compared to Wuxia, Fu Longshao was much calmer. In the Fenghai Ocean, he could still rely on Wuxingzuan's influence. But in the Fenghai Ocean, he had to rely on his own strength to survive. Wuxingzuan said in a deep voice, "Godfather, we can be sure now. These people are here for our Venerable Island's branch. And they're definitely not alone. No matter how strong a person is, even if he could kill second brother and the fourth prince, he couldn't have done it without making a sound. The fourth prince was killed by halberd, while second brother's bones were crushed by absolute strength in his area of expertise. In other words, the other party had at least two powerful cultivators and a powerful force helping them to cover their tracks. Wuxingzuan was completely panicking. Who is it that wants to go against us? When have I offended such a powerful cultivator in all these years? Sigh, if only I had known earlier, would have found a fortune teller for this birthday. It's an unlucky year. Fu Longshao frowned. At this moment, he suddenly felt that his godfather was only a so-so. Previously, Wuxingzuan's name as the God of Eyes had spread far and wide. When Fu Longshao learned that he was Wuxingzuan's godson, he was overjoyed and thought that he could finally make a name for himself. However, he neglected one point. He was able to achieve what he had today not because he was Wuxingzuan's godson. Instead, it was their achievements that made Wuxingzuan who he was today. However, Wuxingzuan was simply too calm in the past. He was so calm that it was as if everything was under his control. But now, Wuxingzuan's attitude made Fu Longshao a little uncomfortable. He coughed and said, "Godfather, the enemy is in the dark while we're out in the open. Everything will be fine as long as we defend Supreme Island." Before Wuxingzuan could say anything, a servant suddenly came to report, "Master, Tianyishui Hall's pavilion Lord Pak Donglai, Stormy Waves Alliance's leader Ko Shintong, and Cetacean Society's leader Long Tianying are here to visit." "What are they here for?" Fu Longshao frowned. "They should be here to pay their respects after learning of second brother's death," Wuxingzuan replied after thinking for a while. "They've been rather obedient all these years, especially Long Tianying. He gave many of his businesses in Cetacean Society to my Hua family." Fu Longshao twitched his mouth. Long Tianying didn't give them those businesses, but the Hua family snatched them away. "Godfather, don't be careless. None of them are easy to get along with. Ko Shintong has a grudge against second brother. It's already good enough that he didn't set off firecrackers to celebrate second brother's death. Why would he come to pay his respects? As for that Pak Donglai, don't be fooled by his forthright appearance. He's actually a scheming person, and he's good at hiding a dagger behind his smile. It's best to be careful. It can't be, right?" Wuxingzuan was confused. Pak Donglai has been very obedient all these years. Every birthday celebration, he would give the most expensive present apart from the two of you. Wuxingzuan believed in his own judgment, but he forgot that he could only see a person's future achievements. He couldn't see a person's true thoughts. Fu Longshao smiled bitterly in his heart. This was the problem. Pak Donglai isn't even your godson. Why does he have to give me such good things every time? With his guard up, Fu Longshao followed behind Wuxingzuan and walked out together. In the main hall, Pak Donglai and the other two were there. Seeing Wuxingzuan and the other two walking out, Pak Donglai quickly stood up and said, "Fifth Lord, I heard something happened to Bailey Island's Lord." "What happened?" Wuxingzuan's face was gloomy. He waved his hand and said, "I'm afraid someone saw that I've been controlling Donghai for too long, so they want to jump out and cause trouble. By the way, why did the three of you come this time?" Pak Donglai took a step forward and said, "We heard something happened to Bailey Island's Lord, so we wanted to take a look and offer our condolences. Also, I have a piece of news that I want to tell you, Fifth Lord." What news? Pak Donglai took another step forward and said, Our Tianyishui Hall often has fleets that purchase all kinds of resources coming and going from various seas. When Bailey Island's lord was killed, one of our Tianyishui Hall's fleets happened to pass by not far from where Bailey Island's lord was killed, and they noticed something. Hu Xingzuan immediately went forward and said, Oh? What did you find? Pak Donglai said in a deep voice, We found out that the people who killed Bailey Pobing are, us. As soon as he said that, Pak Donglai's expression instantly became extremely ferocious. A small crimson sword had appeared in his hand without anyone noticing. The small sword was only the length of a forearm, but it seemed to be made of magma. It was so hot that it was distorting the surrounding space. Old fart, you know that you've controlled East Sea for too long. Since that's the case, you should be prepared to give up your position. The next moment, the crimson sword had already broken through the space, easily tearing apart Hu Xingzuan's protective aura, and the next moment, it would completely pierce into his chest. Even Fu Longshao couldn't react in time. Fu Longshao was in charge of the Blue Dragon fleet, so he was naturally quite knowledgeable. Therefore, he could tell at a glance, just like Chu Xiu, that Pak Donglai was a schemer. He was definitely a smiling tiger, unlike how he appeared to be submissive on the surface. However, he didn't expect Pak Donglai to have the intention to kill Hu Xingzuan. He actually dared to do it on Paragon Island. When they were guessing who the murderer was, they didn't expect Pak Donglai to be one of them. It was too late to stop the attack. However, a pill suddenly appeared in front of Hu Xingzuan. That pill seemed to be made of gold and iron. Countless extremely sharp and resplendent sword chi burst out from it, and in an instant, it had already completely strangled the crimson sword. Chapter 10:17. Pak Donglai's sudden assassination had already caused Hu Xingzuan to break out in cold sweat. For Hu Xingzuan, who had lived like a prince for over 100 years, even if he were to fight with Pak Donglai one-on-one, he wouldn't be a match for Pak Donglai, let alone this kind of sudden assassination. Fortunately, he still had a trump card, which was the pill he had on him. This was the sword pill that Xiu Tianya had given to Hu Xingzuan. A sword pill that was formed by gathering boundless sword chi in one's dantian was a method used by some sword grandmasters in ancient times. When facing an enemy, a sword pill would be spat out from one's dantian, and boundless sword chi would be released. The killing power would be abnormally shocking. However, in the later stages, this method was abandoned because it was too time-consuming. Condensing a sword pellet could easily take years as the unit of measurement. 1 to 2 years was considered fast. Usually, it would take several years to successfully condense a sword pill. Furthermore, once the sword pill was damaged, not only would several years of effort be wasted, one's vitality would also be damaged. Compared to this, the increase in combat power was obviously not worth it. Therefore, in the later stages, the sword pill was gradually eliminated as a method of sword cultivation. In the past, no one knew where Xiu Tianya had obtained the cultivation method for this sword pill. He didn't plan to use it himself, but he had given it to Hu Xingzuan as a protective treasure. His talent in swordsmanship could be said to be unparalleled. Others had spent several years to successfully condense the sword pill, but he had only spent 1 year to condense it. Moreover, he had risked damaging his own vitality to separate it from his body and hand it over to Hu Xingzuan so that he could save his life. He had never thought that it would really come in handy today. Looking at the flashing sword chi on the sword pill, Hu Xingzuan breathed heavily. He looked at Pak Donglai, and with lingering fear, he shouted angrily, Pak Donglai. You actually dared to kill I, are you courting death? Fine, fine, fine. Today, I will fulfill your wish. Not only will you die, but everyone in Tianyishui Hall will also be executed. Hu Xingzuan shouted crazily, but Fu Longshao didn't seem to be excited. In fact, he even felt a trace of uneasiness. Pak Donglai was simply too calm, so calm that it was as if his assassination had not failed. What else did he have to rely on? Very soon, Fu Longshao found out. When Chu Xiu and Yi Bushuan stepped into the hall, he clicked his tongue and shook his head, Mr. Bo, I told you, this move of yours is useless. Huixingzuan has been in the breezy sea for so many years, and there must be more than one person who wants his life. There must be more than one person who has used assassination methods. Yet, he is still alive and well. How could he not have a trump card? Pak Donglai smiled and said, there's nothing wrong with trying. If we can kill him, it will save us a lot of effort. At this moment, whether it was Huixingzuan or Fu Longxiao, they all looked at Chu Xiu in shock. At the same time, their eyes flashed with intense disbelief. Chu Xiu had clearly left, so when did he return? Huixingzuan pointed at Chu Xiu, his finger even trembling, and said, you killed second brother and the fourth prince? Why? Just because I didn't agree to attack Eastern Qi back then? You want to wipe out Paragon Island? Chu Xiu, you are so ruthless. What a vicious move. Chu Xiu shook his head and said, of course that's part of the reason, but there's another reason. You want to be my father, and that makes me very unhappy. Of course, if you know how my last father died, you will feel very comforted. Those who want to be my father usually end up in a rather miserable state. Huixingzuan's eyes widened. He never expected Chu Xiu to come for revenge for such a ridiculous reason. He had adopted a son for so many years, and it wasn't as if he had never failed. For example, he once told Kang Dongming that he wanted to adopt him as his son, but Kang Dongming didn't agree, so he let it go. Why did it lead to a massacre this time? Chu Xiu suddenly laughed and said, I'm just joking. I, Chu Xiu, am not that narrow-minded. Everyone in the Central Plains Warriors knows that Chu Xiu is famous for being broad-minded. But Fifth Lord Hua, since you don't want to help me, I have to find another way out. I'm very satisfied with Mr. Bo's offer, and I can also fulfill his offer, which is to wipe out Paragon Island. Huixingzuan gritted his teeth and said, you betrayed us and killed Pak Donglai. I promise you that I will gather all the forces in the breezy ocean to help you attack Eastern Qi. Hearing this, everyone, including Fu Longxiao, couldn't help but look at Huixingzuan. Chu Xiu was stunned for a moment, then he laughed and said, Fifth Lord Hua, you're already a few hundred years old. Can you not be so naive? You've already killed half of your people, and you've even unsheathed your sword. Is it possible for you to take it back now? What's done can't be taken back, and what's done can't be disobeyed. Today, it's your fate to die. Perhaps it was because Huixingzuan realized that he had reached a dead end, he was no longer as terrified and panicky as before. He said coldly, do you really think it's that easy to kill I? Fu Longxiao's nerves were stretched to the limit, and he was ready to escape at any time. That's right, he was going to escape by himself. He had no intention of bringing Huixingzuan along. He had repaid Huixingzuan with enough things over the years. He didn't want to wait here and die with Huixingzuan. Chu Xiu, Yi Bushuan, Pak Donglai, and Ko Shentong. For true fire spirit refinement state cultivators were more than enough to attack Supremacy Island. This was especially so for Chu Xiu. He alone was more terrifying than the remaining three people combined. What could they use to fight? How could they continue fighting? Pak Donglai and Ko Shentong each took out a cylindrical object. They moved it lightly, and light pierced through the houses and shot into the sky. The fleets from Tai Nishui Hall and the Stormy Tide Alliance that were lying in ambush were rushing over from all directions, ready to destroy Sovereign Island. Chu Xiu said in a deep voice, sword pellet? This thing is quite interesting. Leave it to me. The three of you, don't let Fu Longxiao escape. The expressions of everyone present were extremely relaxed. Things were almost in the bag now that things had developed to this point. Ko Shentong had a huge grudge against Sovereign Island's Hua family, so he charged towards Fu Longxiao with earth energy. Yi Bushuan and Pak Donglai walked to the back slowly, blocking any way that Fu Longxiao could dodge. Just as Fu Longxiao was about to fight to the death, Huixingzuan waved his hand as fast as he could. Blood splattered as he drew runes in the air. His speed was so fast that it was as if he had practiced it countless times. Chu Xiu punched out, but but the sword pellet released an extremely sharp sword energy. The power within it was actually able to clash head-on with Chu Xiu. Chu Xiu didn't take a single step back. In that moment of delay, the entire sovereign island started shaking. It was as if an earth dragon was turning over. Pak Donglai suddenly thought of something. He shouted, "Quick, get rid of Fu Longshao." As soon as his voice fell, he saw countless arrows shining with the 5 elements Gang Qi exploding toward them. The energy on the arrows was the purest energy of heaven and earth. They also contained extremely pure power. Moreover, the arrowheads of the arrows were made with the material of divine weapons. Even Pak Donglai and the others wouldn't be able to withstand it for a long time. Just then, the 5th Lord Hua shouted, "Ing! Quick, attack! Kill him!" As soon as the 5th Lord Hua shouted, an arrow immediately shot towards Chu Xiu. However, the moment he saw the arrow, Chu Xiu's expression changed. It wasn't because the arrow was too strong. Instead, it was because Chu Xiu was too familiar with it. The pitch-black arrow was infused with the power of nirvanic extermination. It was actually the Triple City Destruction Arrow. The flames around Chu Xiu burned intensely. He punched out and collided with the Triple City Destroying Arrow. With a loud bang, the flames of destruction immediately detonated the destructive power. In the past, Chu Xiu had always used this arrow to deal with others. However, when it was his turn to bear the power, he finally realized how overbearing the power of the Triple City Destroying Arrow was. One could only use pure power to counteract it. No other method could completely dissolve the destructive power. Just then, Chu Xiu also saw the appearance of the person who shot the Triple City Destroying Arrow. It was a tall, thin man dressed in a black robe from head to toe. Half of his face was covered by a black veil as he stood in a dark corner. However, his powerful demonic aura attracted everyone's attention, including Fu Longshao. Although he had vaguely heard that his adoptive father seemed to have an adopted son protecting him in secret, this was the first time he had seen this person in person. His attack was so powerful that it was shocking. The man in black was the adopted son of the 5th Lord Hua, but he was also not. He was the shadow of the 5th Lord Hua, the shadow that had always been hiding in the dark. The other adopted sons had been found by Hua Xingzuan on his own initiative. Only Ying had been accidentally rescued by Hua Xingzuan. At that time, Ying was drifting on the sea and was rescued by Hua Xingzuan. However, Ying was already severely injured and did not even have long to live. Hua Xingzuan could see the light on his body flickering. It was obvious that he would become an expert in the future if he could survive. If he couldn't, there was nothing more to say. Although Hua Xingzuan had gathered many famous doctors to treat him, Ying's injuries still could not be healed. He had to ensure that he slept for a long time every day to preserve his lifespan. Therefore, he took the initiative to hibernate under the Supreme Island. From then on, he would protect the entire Supreme Island as Hua Xingzuan's shadow. Only Hua Xingzuan alone could wake him up with a secret technique. Every time Ying attacked, it would consume his little lifespan. All these years, everything had been smooth sailing for Hua Xingzuan. Even though he had some enemies, none of them could threaten his life. He did not expect to encounter a life-or-death situation when he used Ying's trump card for the first time. However, Chu Xiu did not care about Hua Xingzuan. Instead, he stared at Ying and asked, "Where did you get your Triple City Destroying Arrow?" You're tuning into the Carefree Valley YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.